Wittmer, and thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We were just talking about when we weren't recording, how you and your father had done a couple podcasts before regarding, I guess, not necessarily selling your line of work or your business, but more about talking about it. And through the act of authentically talking about it in the industry, people were gravitating towards that as a successful sales tactic, right? They didn't feel like they were being sold anything, and it seemed to be a little bit more receptive to the audience. Do you think, aside from what it is that you do, aside from the product that you're selling or providing, do you think that that is the nature or the trajectory of sales going forward, is authenticity, not necessarily like paid promotion? Or do you think maybe I'm kind of hyper focused on this?
No, I think there's a lot to be said about authenticity, and just you could see it in a lot of areas, not just I think from the sales side too, even with I think platforms that are less produced, people are gravitating towards, like if you look at different like large like YouTube channels that are growing, I think it's that authenticity that people like are kind of craving and gravitate towards.
I would agree. I think it's maybe stems also from the fact that with the advent of technology, you're getting bombarded with ads so prevalently, right? I think it's always existed. Mm-hmm. I just don't think it's been so in our face. So like before, it used to be the billboard when you were driving around, more like subliminal, or maybe like you were opening up the yellow pages and there was like a wanted ad or something like that, right? Like it was around the thing that you were doing. But now I feel like a lot of sales is the barrier to the thing that you want to do. So you click on a YouTube video, and before the video even starts, you get the ad that you have to press the skip ad, or maybe if the ad is, something that you want to do, then you go down that path. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there's like that initial front-facing hurdle. And I think that might be the difference of people just getting bombarded with these ads that they might not necessarily be interested in, so that when they are listening to a podcast or maybe an audiobook or what have you, and someone's discussing in depth and passionately whatever it is. It could be chocolate, it could be fighting, it could be male enhancement, performance enhancement, whatever. Sure. If you have someone on there that's like passionate or learned and really espouses on what he's saying, and that authenticity comes through, like, oh, this guy's not trying to sell me something. He truly believes in this thing, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think that's that word of mouth from prior ages. Now, instead of your friend telling you, you're going direct to the source, perhaps the business owner, a sales rep, what have you.
Yeah, and I think for our business, that what's really the long format is great, because I think obviously people are entrusting their health in you. So when we go and do a few hour podcast, I think they really get to feel that they know you, versus I think where a lot of places get it wrong, in my opinion, is there's not that foundation laid out anywhere, like online on your online footprint, where like they're just throwing ads out there and they want to learn more about you. Where now, with the great thing about YouTube, with everything saved out there, they can go and search. Hey, if they really want to get to know us and make an informed decision on what direction they want to go, there's quite a few hours in long format. So I think they can really get to know us and what we're about. So it's really helpful.
Can I ask, if you don't mind, I want to segue to how you're even on this show now. You and I have a mutual friend in Jordan Dowdy, and Jordan was actually the one who reached out to me. He's like, hey, like, you should have Jeff on your podcast. And I was like, sure, I'm all ears. Why should I have Jeff on my podcast? And he was basically kind of letting me know that, A, I haven't had anybody like you on the podcast before to talk about performance, but not necessarily from like just the training aspect. Also, I guess there's like a diet, there's a training, and then there's also supplementation.
Sure.
Right?
And drugs.
You
can get there.
Sorry.
It's all good.
He's like, we'll just jump in the deep end.
Yeah, it's all good.
And I think one of the things I'm really excited about having you on is there's always been this negative connotation for me in my sport of mixed martial arts with drugs specifically, because they were always deemed the performance enhancer. Right, and that came with it this like dirty, cheating connotation, because you're in the act of the competition, right? When I was talking with you on the phone, we had a good 30, 45-minute discussion, and we were touching bases on different sports, different people, different walks of life. So before we even get to the part that we agree or disagree on, I would love to just take a couple minutes and discuss how you even came to this line of work or to this product or to this avenue that you've chosen? Like, why was it performance enhancing or drugs or testosterone, what have you? What this world? Why was it that this was what you gravitated towards?
Yeah, for sure. I'll start with just kind of how this came to fruition. So I had saw some clips popping up from your podcast, and it was kind of guest after guest that I knew, and obviously I know Jordan through Matt Owens at Project Deliverance. So I've been training there for about 5 years or so. I ruptured my quad tendon right at about 5 years ago. And then there was a friend in town from the my background's in Olympic style weightlifting. So I had a friend in town doing a seminar at Project Deliverance. So I went over there with him, and I actually went to college at Lindenwood with Matt. So we had known each other before, I would say just acquaintances. And then I was there in a full leg brace. And then Matt just looked at me real serious and was like, I'll help you rehab. And I was like, oh, he's like, we'll get you back like squatting heavy and stuff in no time. I mean, he was just dead serious. I don't know if you've ever met him, but he's kind of serious. He's intense. And I was like, okay, like I could kind of feel the passion. And so that was how I started training there, was just to rehab my knee. I've been doing a little bit of PT at a couple local places, but I knew it wasn't going to get me to where I wanted to go, because I still wanted to be able to train heavy and kind of push myself into my 30 some, just kind of for my own mental health and for fun too. And just wanted to get back to 100%. So Matt helped me along that journey. And then obviously, as you know, there's a lot of different MMA fighters and jiu-jitsu guys that train through there, from Sean Woodson to, obviously Jordan is who I met from that. So that was a mutual acquaintance. So I'll see Jordan in and out of the gym here and there, but that's what led to it.
Do you guys ever like sit down? Because Jordan's like another person who has a good mind for like the diet, the nutrition, the health and recovery. He's actually one of the best guys I know when it comes to how to properly cut weight. Have you and Jordan?
I've heard that.
Have you guys ever sat down and talked about some of this stuff?
We have talked about some of it, not the weight cutting part, but I know just, with him and Matt kind of putting their heads together, and Matt had told me, he's like, yeah, he goes, Jordan has this like down to a science just from the reps. So yeah, definitely an interesting guy once you get him to open up and start talking. At first he seems a little quiet and intimidating, but then once you know him, it's like, oh, this is the nicest guy ever. Cool cat. So no, I really like him. And then, to answer your other question as far as how we got into this industry, and there's a lot of different names for it. So you may, the name of our business was Wittmer Rejuvenation Clinic. So it may be called Rejuvenation Medicine. You may hear health optimization, hormone optimization, but I think a lot of the acronyms that resonate with people are like HRT, TRT.
Yeah.
I don't love TRT just because we do a lot more than just testosterone replacement therapy, but I found that everyone just kind of lumps it in together when the industry started getting a little bit more, more popular.
Is HRT hormone replacement therapy?
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I
understood. Yeah. And really replacement isn't the right word, because you're not taking anything out and putting it back in. You're really just optimizing what's in the body that's already there. So it could just be low. We need to optimize it with a bioidentical version of it through a medication to get to what an optimal level looks like, which could be different for different people. But as far as how we got into that industry, myself and my dad. So my dad was familiar. My dad kind of came up in the 70s and 80s in Olympic style weightlifting. So he was familiar, in that era. There's no drug testing. They're dabbling in, it was kind of, you take any drugs you can. They viewed it back then kind of how we view supplements now. Like there was that same, there's that stigma kind of faded, I think, with supplements, but that was kind of how it was viewed then. It was like, hey, if you lift, now if you go to the gym, you're going to take some supplements, where back then it was like, okay, you're going to compete in weightlifting, you're going to take some drugs, you're going to take some anabolics. So he was familiar with, obviously performance enhancers or these types of drugs for quite some time. And then once he got a little bit older, I was seeing that he was having a lot of joint pain himself, like orthopedically. He probably kept lifting heavy for too long. And this is really, you'll like this. So I'm sure you're familiar with the, when it was very liberal with the therapeutic use exemptions within different state athletic commissions. So they were allowing, you saw these career resurgences, like I think Dan Henderson was one of them, Vitor Belfort was one of them, and the parameters that they had,
Overeem.
Yeah, and the parameters that they had set, I think California was doing it, Nevada was allowing it, and I think they were going off of nanograms per deciliter. Like there wasn't a real test for it. So, they were saying, hey, if you have a prescription from a doctor, if you're hypogonadal, where your testosterone's, decreasing, which decreases with age, that you can go in here and compete and use, therapeutic testosterone. So that was a thing. I think Chael Sonnen had a waiver at one point. And so,
well, it's also keen to point out that when that was originally happening, there were some fighters that could have definitely benefited from that. But the problem was it was getting to the point where, for every one Dan Henderson who had been in the game for a long time, you started seeing some of the younger guys be like, oh, this is basically like a license to get into this system. And I might be 28 years old.
Yeah.
My endocrine system is at peak. Let's get to that next level.
Like Todd Duffy got on it. I don't know if you remember him.
He was a freak. He still is a freak specimen.
Yeah. I actually have some kind of mutual friends with him. I've never met him, but he was one that had got on it. But what I was seeing, though, was I thought what was interesting to me to see these guys in their 40s, long-time athletes, someone like Dan Henderson's caliber, multi-time Olympian in Greco, and to see just kind of the physically how he was performing. And I'm like, and I started kind of looking into it a little bit more. I thought I found it interesting how can they have this career resurgence? And it seemed to be they're only taking testosterone. It could have been other things for some of them, but I don't think with Dan, it was like he's taken a whole, because they were still drug testing. They were just allowing elevated testosterone levels. And it's questionable with how they were tracking the parameters, like I said earlier. But when I was getting at it, I was like, started talking to my dad. I said, what do you think about getting back on testosterone? Just a low dose. And he's like, oh, I don't know about that. Like I'm almost 60 now. I don't think so. And then he kind of thought about it more, started reading up on it. And then he had an acquaintance of his in Florida who actually owned a clinic. And then kind of as time went on, they talked a little bit about it. And eventually we decided to open one here. After he did quite a bit of research and both of us did. So that was really how it got started. And this was in 2017. So 2017, it was starting to become more popular, but like it was
TRT, HRT.
Yes, yeah, it was just kind of starting to get a little more well known. In Missouri, I feel like in the Midwest, with some of this stuff comes a little bit later. Like there was a lot of clinics in Florida because there's a lot of compounding pharmacies in Florida because the laws are more favorable. So
also the population density of the coasts, right? You're gonna have a bigger market. Makes sense.
So you saw a lot more clinics in California, Texas, California. They've been doing it in California for some time with actors and whatnot. So there's definitely a bigger market, and the prices were quite a bit higher too. But we when we got into it, there was a few places in St. Louis actually has quite a few compared to other cities. Really? There's a lot of people that got into it fairly early. But when we first got into it, it was interesting because whenever I explained it to people, no one really grasped like the concept when we tried to explain it. Everyone was just like, hold on, so you're selling like dick pills? I was like, no, like it's not that simple. It's about overall health. We do full blood panels. We check overall wellness panels too. Stuff that your primary care physician might not just be checking on a regular basis. So, before a patient even starts with this, we're running, over 50 blood markers on someone that, younger people, it's kind of hard to get your PCP to sign off on that, then try to build your insurance, because they have to put in code, diagnostic codes for the reasoning for the testing. So it can't just be because of you're curious. So
is my T levels low? I don't know. I want to go get some blood work.
So it's so that was really what led us into it. And I would say I felt like we were still early then because it was a slow roll at the beginning as we were trying to like build it out. And really at the beginning, it was a lot about educating, and there weren't a ton of podcasts, out there talking about it. There weren't near as many companies. Now you have tons of podcasts. The podcasts are sponsored by clinics. You have influencers jumping on board with, use my code for discounted blood panels. That wasn't very prevalent, about, 7-8 years ago like it is now. So it really picked up steam, pretty quickly. Then I would say the biggest game changer for the industry and even for our clinic as well was during COVID, once they announced a public health emergency, because traditionally it's not, you cannot prescribe, physicians cannot prescribe controlled substances via telehealth across state lines. Once
Before COVID.
yeah, pre-COVID. So once the public health emergency was announced, they lifted that requirement. They lifted that stipulation where, hey, during the public health emergency, we're going to allow it because there's a lot of states do have shortages of doctors, and you throw in rural areas, so it was affecting access. So with the exception of Schedule 1 drugs, they weren't allowing like via telehealth in most instances. But
What would testosterone fall under?
it's Scheduled 3.
Okay,
so it's
so
a Schedule
not even
3
close.
drug, and it really shouldn't be scheduled. That's kind of a whole other conversation. But that is what opened up the door, because we rolled it out. We did a few states, like just kind of did word of mouth. We got our docs license in some additional states. We were just doing face-to-face care, so we kind of had to rebuild the model some, because our patients were, I mean, people were, you know how COVID went, people weren't wanting to leave. So I was like, hey, we can do telehealth now. And we kind of band-aided some systems together to start it. And then we piloted it with, with Texas, just Illinois, Missouri, California. And then eventually we added Florida, and then added a couple dozen more states. And then now we do all 50 states. Now, not all 50 states you can prescribe controlled meds, because you have to pay attention. You have the federal laws and you have the state laws. So you have to be compliant with both. So many layers to pay attention to there. But yeah, what I was getting at was with the with COVID, is really where it opened it up. So you saw more telehealth companies, and then you saw the local brick and mortar clinics like ours were venturing out into telehealth. So that's what got it a lot more popular. It's more accessible. Because some of these cities, there weren't that many clinics. You couldn't find a primary care doctor or other providers to do it. There's some urologists that may prescribe it, ones that are kind of up with the research on it. But that was really what opened up the doors to really growing the industry.
You said that when you were first kind of getting inundated with this, you had to do a whole lot of like education to X, Y, and Z, based because there was this preconceived notion of what it is that you were actually trying to sell. Your example was like, what is this, dick pills? And you're like, no, hold up. Like, this is like a complete panel. This is a much more thorough process. How big was that hurdle to try to educate? And did time elapsing on its own make that a little bit easier?
Yes, no, absolutely. The time helped as well. So like, let's say, when you hear the word testosterone, there's always a negative there used to be more of a negative connotation, because it got associated with just drugs and sports and positive drug tests and PEDs, when they're like, hey, you're going to inject testosterone. That's like, this and that baseball
roid
player.
out. You do this,
Exactly. So, or they'll think of bodybuilding community. So when you hear testosterone, I think people think roid rage, big muscles, the bodybuilding or former athletes, cheating is how it was viewed. So trying to get past that to say, hey, well, one, it's just a therapeutic level dose of testosterone. Where, for example, to put in perspective, we may prescribe somewhere between 100 and 2 milligrams per week. A pro bodybuilder may run all the way up to 1,000 milligrams per week. So
of what, testosterone?
Testosterone, yeah.
And where are you harvesting, or how are you acquiring this testosterone? Is this like plant-based? Is this synthesized? Because I'm also interested in, when someone says testosterone, there's natural ways, like through diet and through lifestyle changes, that you can kind of kickstart your endocrine system into producing more, right? There's also foreign agents that you can insert into the body, but even that, testosterone can be, correct me if I'm wrong, this is as I know it, there are multiple ways to acquire testosterone organically and synthesized.
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at is there's, as far as you're saying, boosting your natural levels through like herbs.
Yes, and how are you guys getting the testosterone? Like,
Gotcha.
how do you say you give someone 50 to 100 milligrams of testosterone. Okay, where does that testosterone come from?
Gotcha. So so we contract with compounding pharmacies, so they'll make it in the compounding pharmacy.
So they're synthesizing.
Yeah, and there's different variations where some of it's from yams, and there's different oils.
Some could be plant-based, some could be animal-based.
Yeah, and so with same with like thyroid medication as well. It could be different as well. Then there's different oils too that are used with it. There's some you can blend it MCT oil. There's grapeseed oil, cottonseed oil. So there's a lot of different variations.
Do the different oils do something different, or is it just different oils that can still get to the same end goal?
I think a lot of people read way too much into the different oil types. Like I would say if it is it's one thing if you have an allergy to like
Yeah.
something and an adverse reaction to it. I think it comes down to split hairs just from our experience in the industry. Like you're not going to feel that much different. Now there's also, in addition to that, there's different esters attached to the testosterone as well. So like you have testosterone cypionate, testosterone enanthate, there's testosterone propionate, and you can go down the undecanate. There's all different ones. So
Yeah,
that,
Decadate is the one I know the most from specifically bodybuilders or performance
yeah,
enhancing. They'll say you're on deck, right?
well, the deck you're referring to Decadurabolin. So the undeconated is actually the new. I don't know if you're familiar. The Kysotrex, which is an oral form of testosterone that you can take. That's a newer medication that came out about within the last 18 months or so. The half life's really short, so you have to take the capsules a couple times a day. But we typically prescribe the long ester testosterone, meaning the longer half life. So you don't have to inject as frequently because there's even water based testosterone, but it's in and out of you very quickly, so you'd have to inject multiple times a day.
When you say half life, in terms of chemistry with radioactive material, I understand the idea of half life, but I don't necessarily understand half life when it comes to testosterone. Meaning, from when I inject that testosterone, how long until it's like what half as potent?
If it's exactly, so if it's a longer ester, it typically has a 6 to 7 day half life. So when it starts working its way out of your system, so really like theoretically at that 11 to 14 day point, it's kind of almost worked its way completely out. And you can really feel that too if you're taking testosterone, you have been for some time, just an individual, and you start. Usually it's that 11-day mark after an injection of like a cypionate or an anthate is when you're like, okay, it's kind of hard to get up in the morning. That's when you can really start feeling it if you go off of it. And I've stopped a couple times just to kind of have that feeling just to kind of understand it a little better. And that would definitely be true, that 11, 12 days for me.
When I had Kelly D'Angelo on, we were talking about the price that a female's body and anatomy takes from like cutting weight, fighting. It's much more rigorous on the female frame than it seems to be on the male frame because it suffers from all the same tendencies that the male frame does, right? Overtraining, degradation of the body, the muscles, the tissues, but also the hormonal imbalance that comes with, the menstrual cycle
Sure.
and all the various, variables that women have to deal with. One of the things that she was actually telling me was her body, because a lot of times when we talk about testosterone, we're talking about specifically males, right? But her body had been so beat down from training and cutting weight and all this stuff, she was getting to the point where she wasn't having menstrual cycles. And when she went in and did blood work, she had like her testosterone levels were like in the teens or the 20s, like insanely low, right?
Yeah.
Now, we'll kind of get into what is like, average, what is below average, what is above average. We'll get that later on. But the reason I'm bringing this up is she had to get on some testosterone for a short time to get back to like a hormonal balance to where everything was kind of operating properly. In your line of work, how often do you work with women versus men? Because obviously it probably is more catered towards men, but do you also do any work with women who are perhaps in sporting or later on in life and they've run, the red a little long? This isn't necessarily correlated to just men. This hormonal replacement therapy or testosterone replacement therapy.
Yeah, with great point. Now with our clinic, so we started from day one treating both men and women. Now women, to all the points you just mentioned, the additional hormones, the menstrual cycles, there's more fluctuation. You have, the phases of menopause. It's a lot more challenging and it's a bigger level of effort from the providers who are managing their care. It's a lot more hands-on. There might be some additional blood work. So a lot of that's why you see a lot of men's low T clinics kind of popping up. That you used to see that, but there weren't as many female clinics, and there weren't as many that do both. There's a lot that only cater to men. So from day one, we said, hey, if we're going to go into this, we want to do both men and women. And so,
why do you think that there was only like those that cater to men? Because I'm thinking about it from like a financial perspective. Like, why would you want to limit your business model to like only one gender? If
it was simpler. Yeah, I mean, you could really just do more of a cookie cutter model where, hey, everyone gets testosterone. HCG, anastrozole, which is an estrogen blocker, and then HCG to stimulate your natural body's production of testosterone while you're taking the testosterone. Hey, everyone can take this, kind of set it and forget it. You want some follow-up labs, you can pay on occasion for that, where you could scale a lot quicker. Where with the female patients, you have to be, it's a lot more hands-on.
More nuance.
Yeah, there's a lot more nuance, especially, at the beginning, but obviously as they're aging, if they're going into perimenopause, it's much more hands-on. So it's a higher level of effort as far as like, billable hours to your providers.
Out of curiosity, just for my own sake, like if you were to do a pie chart of like the percentage between men and women, how much do you think, not in terms of dollars, but like in terms of like individual patients that you guys may have, what do you think the percentage of women to men is?
It's but 70 men, 30 women.
So like a third, almost a third of your...
I would say, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not, I mean, don't get me wrong, it is majority men, but it's not like 90% men, 10% women.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean, that's a good margin.
Nothing like that. And we've, I think too, with a lot of it's contributed to probably some of the larger podcasts that like myself and my dad did, where we had a really good response after. Those podcasts really catered towards male audiences, where we probably haven't done as many that were either kind of more neutral or female catered. So that's kind of something, obviously just, I say we do more marketing now towards females as well. But what we found too is usually, and this can work either way, if a male starts with us who's married, usually eventually, hey, my wife wants to get some blood work done and start, and vice versa. So it seems that it usually will catch up some. We'll get some female referrals if we get more males. They'll get their wives, girlfriends, fiancés.
That doesn't shock me because I know a number of men, not necessarily a lot of women, but also my inner circles tend to be more male than female. But a lot of the men that I know, I was actually with Zach Fagus and Pat Doyle last night, and both of them told me that they're now on testosterone themselves. And they were like, because I asked them, I go, did you notice a quality of life increase? And they both like, Arion, you have no idea. Like this was like life altering for them.
Yeah.
Pat was telling me, because he used to be a professional baseball player, Pat was telling me that his testosterone levels when he did his initial blood work was like 160. And he's
That's
like,
low.
yeah, he's like also 6'4", 260 pounds, like not a small guy. And if we can, I would like to kind of dig in a little bit. I know that you were saying that like you're more on the business side. So to whatever you could answer some of these questions. Sure. When someone says like, I was at 160, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know what's average. I don't know what's below average. I don't know what's above average. Yeah. I don't know what that threshold is. And I don't know how you guys do the calculation. Like, do you take BMI into consideration? Do you take height and age into consideration? Or is it just like, what is this number? When he told me 160, that sounded like a high number to me, but he was saying that it was low. So I was like, okay, I don't know what that means. Does that make sense? What does 160 mean?
I can break that down for you. So when he says 160, that means total just testosterone, total available testosterone in the body, and that's nanograms per deciliter. So it's a blood test measurement. Now, what is considered, a normal range based on the lab panels, it's a very vast range where they'll say normal is between 200 and 900 if you look at like a LabCorp or Quest.
That's a wide delta.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of different theories of why that is. I mean, you have the insurance companies kind of lobbying the labs with some of this data because they don't want to, they don't want to cover this type of treatment, so they have it really wide. Now, to put
they did 400 and 900. Now you have a slew of new patients that can be added.
Yeah, now to put in, because they won't usually start covering until you're below 150 or below 200, and we can get all into that later. But to answer your question, typically a male in their hormonal prime is going to be over 1,000. Now, that's usually earlier 20s into the mid 20s. And then once you get closer to 30, it starts to decline, a few percentage points kind of a year, it'll decrease. So 160 is very, it's very low. When I started, I was around 300 total testosterone. And I got to the point where no sex drive, was having to take naps every day, could barely get out of bed in the morning. And there was a lot of contributing factors to that. But obviously, like with with the testosterone being at 300, now I'm up closer. I stay up closer to 1,000 or so, 900 or so. So
3x
yeah,
almost.
yeah,
More
almost.
than.
Where and with testosterone, once you start taking it, these guys may have told you too. Especially I think too, if you wait too long and like you wait till you really feel like shit, because it's like we just want to fight through it and like, okay, hey, it'll be okay, and we'll just keep forcing. And then eventually you get to the point where I thought I was too young to start. I started at 31. I'm 40 now. So when I started, I was like, I probably won't need it till my 40s. But I'm like, and my wife was the one who was like, you need to go like get like checked.
Check.
It was like, you need to go get your blood work checked. And I got it checked. I was around 300. But you'll notice, so I would say at about the 3 week, to give a good timeline of what to expect to feel, about the 3 week point is when you start noticing an increase in energy. It's a little easier to get up in the morning. I don't really crave that caffeine in the afternoon. It's more sustainable energy throughout the day. Then after that, you'll notice a sex drive increase. And then after that, I would say 6 weeks is kind of where you may feel a little bit better in the gym. Your muscles feel a little bit fuller because it does help with protein synthesis, meaning you're just going to absorb the protein better with elevated testosterone levels. So it's easier to put on muscle mass. But then after, I would say it takes several months until one thing testosterone is really great at is the decreasing visceral fat. So usually within, that 3 to 6 month, with no change in your diet, exercise, anything, the patients will report back, decreased, waistline and things. Yeah, they're like, hey, it's
the gut's starting to trim a
Yeah,
little.
they'll notice in that. So a lot of people, especially people who are lazy, like love it because they're like, hey, I haven't had to change anything. I just, inject this and I feel better. But, obviously if someone's, it's going to intensify the results for someone who's taking care of themselves and eating right and exercising regularly. So guys like that are from us, like, yeah, it can be really life-changing. I would say for me, the biggest thing was probably from a mental standpoint because I was just so tired all the time. And you take a guy, any 30-year-old male, and you take away your energy, take away your sex drive, you're probably going to get kind of depressed, right? Like, fair to say. So
I think it's a natural progression.
For me, I was dealing with depression, and I thought it was like, okay, there's these chemical imbalances in my brain. I don't have enough serotonin, and I went to all these different doctors, and the doctor will tell you, hey, if I could solve the mental health problems, I'd be a billionaire and I wouldn't be here. So they're literally just kind of guessing. And there are some blood tests for serotonin and some of these other blood markers, but it fluctuates so much. It's very challenging to get like an accurate reading. So there's a lot of guessing going on. So I went down a path of getting prescribed, SSRIs. I was on Paxil and some benzodiazepines. And then that just made me feel like a zombie. And I'm like, well, now I don't feel happy. I don't feel sad. I just feel like I feel steady, which was better than before. But then I was like, I don't feel like myself though. Where I had weaned off those medications in early kind of 30s. And then once I'd weaned off those, I got on the testosterone and I was like, wow, like, okay, like I get my sex drive back and I get some energy back. Now I'm not depressed. I have more like motivation and I start yeah. And so you have more motivation too in everything you're doing. So like for me, it was life-changing. Obviously my opinion now comes off bias because I own a clinic, but that was just seeing some of the benefits was kind of where I was like just being a firm believer and seeing what it's made, the difference it's made for me in my life. And my body was pretty beat up too because I competed in Olympic weightlifting for about 15 years at a high level. Went to a couple Olympic trials.
15 years at 31 means you were
I started at 10.
Yeah.
I started at 10. Actually.
Lifting.
Yeah.
Wow.
I started competing at 10,
young.
11. I got out of it early, about 24. I had stopped because there's not much money in weightlifting at all. And I was kind of like, okay, it's time to.
Yeah, but you're a legend in the gym.
Yeah. And the handwriting was on the wall where I was like, I didn't see myself having a shot at the 2012 Olympics where we only qualified one male spot.
So you were genuinely approaching, like when you were doing this, your goal was, I want to represent the U.S. in Olympic weightlifting. So like you weren't just doing heavy lifting because you wanted to put up high weights, my man.
Yeah.
Your goal was that this was a sport that you were actively pursuing.
Yeah, that was the only goal,
You were
was
a
making it
competitor.
to the Olympics. So yeah, snatch and clean and jerk. And so I started around 10 and then, went to about 24 and then compete on some junior world teams and senior world teams. So got to travel a lot, lived at the Olympic Training Center for a couple years. But yeah, I was saying I was having a lot of joint pain from those years of lifting that I thought I'd have forever, because I think a lot of it is I was cleaning over 400 pounds at a pretty young age, like around 17. So like you're thinking it's like 7 years of doing that, where at 24 I felt a lot older. But then once I kind of eased up on,
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Forgive me, because I don't want to deviate from the broader topic,
Yeah.
but with regards to weightlifting, did you think that that's, and I want to be careful how I ask this because I'm not trying to diminish the thing, but do you think that that is like acceptable / healthy to put on your frame at that time when you're hitting puberty? So like I wrestled in high school, and I know for a fact that like my weight cutting in high school affected me forever. In fact, my weight cutting throughout MMA,
Yeah.
I have to be very cognizant now of like my diet and everything because I just don't burn calories the way I used to. Whether that was my metabolism and shooting it my whole life because of weight cutting, I don't know, right? But with regards to weightlifting, the joint pain, the what have you, do you think that it's kind of, I don't want to say the word excessive, but very taxing on a frame that's going through actively puberty and changing immensely, and your joints are growing, your body is changing, to be putting up 400 pounds at 17? That's an insane number.
Yeah, there used to be a thought that
Insane in a good way.
There
like,
used to be a thought that weightlifting would damage like your growth plates. And
Yes.
the big thing when I was lifting and competing, and and then I got to junior high, and then I hear everyone that I know, and then their parents are talking shit behind your back, like, oh, and my dad was my coach. He's gonna stunt his growth and blah blah blah, and all saying this stuff and saying it's going to damage growth plates, where it's actually now, especially with weight training, they're saying it's completely fine to have younger kids lifting weights. There's more benefits to increase bone density.
I would agree. Mine is not necessarily on the weightlifting. I agree on
The
all
weight
that.
cutting.
No,
is
it's the amount. 400 pounds. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
If you
it
told me
does.
200 pounds, I've seen when I was in high school, and I see the high schoolers now putting up some weight like that. If you go to a gym now, like a Glove Fitness, a Gold's Gym, whatever, you're going to see some of the guys putting up the 300s, maybe even to the 400s. I think 400 at 17, it's a kind of like a compliment. That's
Yeah.
an insane
Yeah.
number. But I also worry, if I see a 17-year-old putting up 400 pounds, then I start to think to myself, holy shit, your knees, your elbows, your back, you're still growing. Am I incorrect? Am I ignorant in my
No, I know what you're getting at.
I'm
I
worried.
do, yeah,
I'm worried.
no,
Am I ignorant?
from looking back, like in retrospective, I'm like, okay, should I have kind of taken it easier?
Because I tell the wrestlers now, because they're like, I can cut 5 pounds to get to the next weight class, and I look at their bodies and I'm like, don't, because now wrestling will go from wrestling to now you're just weight cutting.
Yeah.
Is that for you to lose that 5 pounds at your BMI at your age? Don't. But when I was in high school, it was do. Oh, you could cut the 5 pounds? Do it, Arion. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is,
Get the trash bags out. Get the
Yes,
sauna.
like,
We didn't have sauna suits when I was like in high school, but I didn't wrestle or anything. But I remember they'd be like, their coaches, they got them hide.
Yeah.
They eventually banned the trash bags.
and I didn't power lift, so I guess I'm trying to correlate, like, there was a unhealthy thing that I was doing
Yeah.
that now in retrospect, I tell the next generation not to do.
Yeah.
And when I hear 400 pounds at 17, my initial reaction is that's way too much weight at that age. Now, I could also be ignorant. Like, you could be like, Aaron, actually, that's not that much weight.
What I'll say to that is, I mean, I think it's not going to have any sort of effect more so on the endocrine system. I would think on the joints, because what I see, I think it's the age doesn't necessarily matter as much as how long are you lifting those heavy weights. So you may see guys that don't get, or females for that matter, they get a little better into their 20s. They may peak more into their 20s. And it's still, that same kind of career, like shelf life. So like, for example, we'll get some phenoms in the US who get, 14, 15-year-olds doing crazy numbers, as well as in some of these other countries too, in Europe and Asia. Most cases, like maybe they make an Olympic team at 19, 20, 21, then it's kind of they're fading. Like they're fading, then they just go away once they get into their early 20s and mid 20s. So I think there's only a certain period of time for most people. There's going to be outliers who are able to maintain that for a decade plus at that high level. But I think the body can only really take so much. But there's some people that just can get the technique down at a younger age, have good coaches and training methods, can get, or, they just really, like, through puberty, they're getting strong really quickly and are able to, do lifts, what grown men, can do in a lot of cases. So I think it's more so about how long can the body, like, sustain that, as well. So I think training methods now, like, improve, though, like, quite a bit. It seems like,
That wouldn't shock me.
I feel like we know more now, and then from a recovery standpoint, and stuff. So no, it's definitely interesting to think about, but by no means would I say, like, this is, there's a lot of purists in the sport where they're like, this is, like, it's great for your body and stuff. Well, like, hey, it's good to move. It's very technical movements. Like, I don't think it's something everyone should be doing. I think there's more effective ways if the goal is just to get in shape. But, like, obviously any sport that you're trying to push to the extreme, like, it's not going to be healthy ultimately. Like, there's going to be some repercussions from that. Or
at the very least, you just want to make sure the cost is something that you're willing to pay.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially too, when there's just, you're doing it for a pride thing as well, where it's like, hey, I want to make the Olympic team. Like, there's not really any, unless you're getting a gold medal and, like, wait to get money tied to that. There's not going to be much of a financial incentive. So
was that something that you understood when you were doing it, or is this now in retrospect that you understand it?
Oh no, I understood when I was doing it.
Same, when I was fighting, I knew that there was not a lot of money.
Yeah, I did get, like, some of my college paid for.
Nice.
I did get a scholarship through that. There was actually, it was actually federal grant money that they allocated for Olympic athletes at the time. I didn't really understand it all at the time, other than, I just get a letter and say, hey, you can get this scholarship. I had to go to the Olympic Center to get it, to be able to access it. But it was really grateful I was able to get it.
That makes sense for me. As a taxpayer, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, it was actually a congressman's son who competed in, like, an Olympic sport had passed young, and it was in memory of him.
So it wasn't even a taxpayer dollars. It was more of like a...
Yeah, I don't know exactly how they came up with the funding, but it was federal funding, and then eventually that money kind of dried up, and I think it didn't get renewed.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's called BJ Stupak Memorial Scholarship is what it was called.
Well, if there was a fund put in place that was funded by, because we often talk about on this podcast, forgive me, there's politics are often brought up, and we often talk about, like, the tax rate, this, that, or the other. All I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is there are things I am for giving money to and not giving money to. Education, predominantly for those that are aspiring for something, just is like an easy check the box. Like, of course you would want to invest in the next generation. So if there was some sort of, like, federal grant money or like a federal fund that was specific to student athletes who are also trying to strive for the Olympics, that's like a no-brainer to
Well,
me.
one of the biggest misconceptions is that people think that in U.S. and the Olympic sports that it's taxpayer funded. So, like, I'll see stuff around the last Olympics. It's like, oh, our tax dollars good at work here, or if someone does poorly. I'm like, hey, like, dummy, like, no, none of your tax dollars are going to the U.S. Olympic Committee. It's privately funded. It's privately funded through sponsorships and through donations.
Of all the people to raise awareness of that, Flavor Flav promoting and sponsoring the women's water polo team. Of all the people to, like, shed light on this, I don't even know how that even. I didn't know that Flavor Flav was a women's water polo aficionado, but the fact that he was like, hey, like, I sponsored it, and it wasn't. Forgive me for saying this because I know everybody's perspective is different. He did like $150,000, and that covered the whole team.
Yeah.
So you're thinking to yourself, like, sorry, in the grand scheme of things, when we're sending billions here and billions there, like $150,000, there goes that team taken care of. Not a whole lot of money.
Yeah, there's definitely, it'd be a podcast in itself to
talk
about tax dollars and allocations and all that.
Trust me, we've had it before.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But forgive me regarding when you were coming up yourself, because the original question was regarding, like, 17 years of age, putting up 400 pounds. The original thing that sparked in my head was like, ooh, like, what about your knees? What about your shoulders? What about your back? You know? And I guess my original question that I'll ask again is, am I in the wrong for that? Or do you think that is still the status quo? Have times changed? Am I just a pussy? Like, why would I originally think about that?
Yeah, I don't think there's really going to be I think there's always going to be a potential like for injury or risk, but I would say no more than like football or some of these other sports.
Boy, do I
in my
agree.
opinion, like yes, like I do look. I don't really get. I don't. I get on Instagram a little bit. I'll might get on Facebook every once in a while, but I'll usually see like a former lifter is like, oh, I just had double hip replacement surgery, and they're like not even 40 yet, or some of these other injuries. So I do see things that have caught up with people that they didn't get much of a return, out of it financially. So like, yeah, I do think there could be long-term like health consequences in some cases, but some of it's too is how you train, how you lift, what your technique is, how you were taught to lift. It can make you more prone to injuries. But like, yeah, obviously there's a level of risk like with it for sure. I would not deny that. Because I had a partially torn quad tendon, eventually fully ruptured. If I never competed in weightlifting, I wouldn't have it. But the things I
You might
learned,
have a myriad of other physical
yeah,
ailments if you weren't necessarily active, though.
yeah. But for
Right?
me, it's like it made me who I am today, doing an individual sport, getting up there at a agreed upon time and place, making weight, showing up on a stage by yourself to to lift the
Lift in
weight
front of
in
people.
front of people. I think it's a great character builder too,
I
and
would
I think
agree.
that's helped me. It's helped me a ton. I think definitely like with nerves, like I don't get nervous doing different things or different scenarios, or if it's over the years doing job interviews or whatnot. Like I don't feel that same level of nerves because I'm like, oh, this is nothing versus getting ready to
you've
like,
done before.
yeah, going to Russia and competing in front, in front of a crowd there, being an American.
Also
I'm like,
trying to
yeah,
represent your country.
yeah, I'm like that. I'm like, oh, this is like nothing.
Forget
So,
representing a company.
yeah,
You're representing red, white, and blue.
and doing it at a young age as well. Where, yeah, so like I think that helped a ton. Like
Yeah.
for me,
I guess maybe I'm just a hypocrite, right? Because when I was coming up, and if you would have asked me when I was a fighter, I was like, by any means necessary. Like, I'm trying to be the best in the world. Yet now that I'm removed from it, I seem to be the one who's like, well, like, let's be a
I'm the
little
same way a
cautious.
little bit. I'm the same way a little bit because looking back, you're like, yeah, because I
These are
think
the
we
mistakes I
don't
made.
know the things then. And I think too, what I would have told like my younger self was like, hey, it's not the end of the world if you have a bad meet. Like
Yeah.
it was like or a bad, competition, just like you like had a bad fight. Like if you lose to someone you don't think you're gonna lose to, it was like holy shit, this was just devastating, and it would send me in a spiral for a little bit. But then I'd come back with motivation and fight back and persevere. But I just think I put too much weight on it at the time. Where I look back, it's all kind of silly. It all feels kind of silly now, like looking back at it. And I have a lot of friends who are Olympians and all that, and it's like people we make a joke and stuff because no one really remembers. They may remember like you're an Olympian or whatever, and his goal was to get an Olympic medal. He competed for another country, but he didn't get a medal. But he goes, shit. He goes, half the people think I already want to. They always call me a gold medalist because people just forget. They don't really remember. Where now, like I think you move on with your life, and you get into a new chapter. Like, hey, it's cool to reflect on, but looking back, I'm like, at that time, I thought it was like everything, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot more to life, than this. Yeah, I think too. Where even
I agree 100%.
yeah, where I was like, gosh, it was so silly. Now, obviously, like with having my own business and married and kids, I'm like that. Yeah, that just seems so small now.
The pool of responsibility has grown so much.
It was the only thing I used to think about. Then even in my 20s, of having regrets, like, oh, I should have did this. Like it was just like my world. Where now I'm just like, I don't even give a shit. I'm like I was like, God, I look back, I'm like, I was an idiot for like, being that, thinking it was like life or death scenarios, for sure. And I think probably a lot of people could look back and say that too.
Yeah.
But
I don't think it's isolated to athletes as well. I think, it's human nature to go back with hindsight being 2020 and think this, that, or the other. I guess my whole thing is as I progress, because I'm only 32, right? So you're a little bit older than me, a little bit wiser than me. So forgive me if I'm
I don't know
saying
about
something.
that.
Forgive me if I say something you already know. You know what I mean? But
You're doing a lot better than I was in my early 30s. Let's just put it that way.
oh, thank you. I appreciate that. But I guess I oftentimes start to think to myself, like, especially today, when I was 20, the purview of what was important to me and the way I thought was so vastly different from 24, from 28. Now I'm 32. So knowing that now, that the way I look at what is important to me or how I'm navigating based on the variables presented to me today, I often also start to think, hey, it's not that serious, man. In 4 years from now, you're not going to remember half the problems. You're not even going to like really dwell on the things that are
Yeah.
really driving you crazy right now. And I guess what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is it's funny how as you progress, that becomes more and more prevalent and more observable and obvious. Yet I still suffer from it because I could tell you the shit that I did in wrestling that I did wrong. I could tell you the stuff I did, but
Yeah.
I'm sure now I'm making some of those same mistakes in my marriage, as a father, in my businesses. Like, I don't think it's, I don't think it ever eclipses us. I just think that the vehicle changes. I could be
I think
wrong.
that's what leads a lot of athletes to coaching too, because if they are kind of hung up on some of their mistakes and they want to influence the next generation,
Yes.
like I think that's where, and they become very, very passionate coaches. Where that's where I'm like, I don't think it's always like, we all know this. Like the best athletes don't always make
The best
the
coaches.
best coaches, but I think sometimes you might want those people fucked up a lot. Throughout their career, and then they're going to go back and teach, and learn from those mistakes and just say, hey, here's where I went wrong. So I think that's what leads to that passion for coaching for a lot of people. So it may be someone who's kind of on the surface of shit competitor. They didn't compete that well, but they made just a phenomenal coach.
They know 1,000 ways how to not do it.
Exactly, and they learned from it, and then they're, hey, they're not. They kind of aged themselves out by the time they learned, and then now they're influencing, the former teammates or a new generation of athletes, and that can be said in any sport.
Yeah, I agree. I do, if you don't mind, I want to cater the conversation back because
Sure.
you said that with regards to, testosterone replacement therapy, hormone replacement therapy, and ultimately what you developed a business in, that there were like these moments that kind of got you to change. And it was like your father getting on it. And specifically, you were discussing how you were going through like SSRIs yourself because there was this imbalance in your life that led to a depression. And you thought that you had more of like the acuity was more mental, not necessarily physical, like chemical throughout your body, right? So you thought, I'm depressed, I'm going to take these SSRIs and this will kind of solve the problem. Didn't necessarily work for you in that scenario. For some people, it does, duly noted.
Yeah.
But for you, anecdotally, it did not. And then you had a discussion with your wife, you said. Can you, because I'll explain why I'm asking this question. I'm 32 years old. So when you tell me that at 31, 32, you got on testosterone, the very first thing I'm thinking, maybe it's a pride thing, maybe it's an ego thing, is like, the fuck do I have low T? Like, no way, Jeff. Like, I'm an animal, right?
Yeah.
But I'll be the first person to tell you that I know for a fact I don't feel like how I did when I was 25.
Yeah.
But how do I wrestle? There is an inevitability that I will age. And I should not feel like I did when I was 25 because I'm not 25. So, like, if you were to say you had that discussion with your wife or your wife had a discussion with you, what were some of the precursors that led to that discussion? Because some people might have a similar story to you, and maybe it's ego preventing them from getting blood work, or maybe it's their spouse not having that conversation that they want to have, or maybe it's like they had the discussion, but they're not coming to the realization because they're fighting it one way or another.
Yeah.
I'm trying to navigate the psychology to this because, and I hate to say it this way, perhaps you being on the other side, you have a different perspective. For me, on this side of the wall, I'm thinking there's nothing wrong with me. I'm a fucking man. I can do all the shit. Yeah, I take more naps. Yeah, I get more tired. Yeah, my sex drive's lower, but I'm still doing fine. Like, I don't need anything. Like,
Yeah.
how do you navigate that for younger men or
Sure.
for people that were maybe in your position? How did you navigate that?
Yeah. I mean, it's always going to come down to a personal choice, and there's going to be different opinions. Where there's some people, I think they just have it in their mind where, they know they need it, but they're going to say, hey, I'm going to wait till my 40s to do it. And they just, have this preconceived number of when to wait. It's different. Like, it's tough to give you an answer because I've heard so many different stories over the year from like the thousands of people who've come to us that there's always different reasons like why someone like wants to start. But typically it's just saying, hey, I don't want to feel this way anymore. And when it starts affecting your relationships, your work output, I think that's when it creates more issues, and then people start taking it a little bit more seriously. And that's not just testosterone; it can be other hormonal deficiencies too that people are battling as well. But I think sometimes people wait till it gets really bad and starts affecting. Some people are a little more proactive. But I think too, like we talked about earlier, there's a bigger level of awareness about it now. Like this is interesting because we'll have younger men typically in their like 20s say, hey, I want to get a blood panel done because I want to see what's getting close to my hormonal prime. What's my baseline when I'm close to my prime? Like there's guys, we have guys that'll just once a year get their testosterone checked to see in their 20s. Say, hey, I just want to see like where it's going. If it does dip down, okay, what contributed to that? Was it lifestyle related? And digging into that a little bit deeper. So I think that kind of stigma and resistance is kind of fading just because it's around us a lot more, like whether it be on the commercials, the online ads, there's a lot of content surrounding it.
I also think the transparency of truly knowing is just intelligent. Like, why am I going off these feelings? Why not just get some actual hardcore data?
Yeah.
At 28, I was here. At 29, I was here. At 30, this trajectory is not looking good. Maybe we can...
I think too, people weren't comfortable talking about it. Even when we opened our clinic, I was like, hey, we're going in this business, and it was still, even for me, I'm a pretty private person, so it was like, oh, this is kind of weird talking about it. And there's like, oh, you may think, oh, like, I don't really care what anyone thinks, but I think some people will be like, oh, well, how's that going to be perceived? It just seems strange talking about it, but I think a lot of people, as the industry grew and more acceptance, the more accepting it became, you saw people want to talk about it more, tell their stories more. They're feeling better. Other stuff, and it can be. It's a lot of people that came to us like really really dark times in their lives, like really bad depression. Deaths within the family, like really low spots. So like even if you go and read like our Google reviews, like there's some pretty like touching stories there of people saying like, hey, I'm borderline suicidal, and then I got my hormones in order, and it's kind of set my life on a right course. And I don't want to knock like the SSRIs and these other means of medication for like, I think they're
overprescribed.
They are. I don't want to knock them in the sense that there isn't a medical need in some cases.
There's truth to it. Yeah, but it's overprescribed.
Yeah, 100%. But I think they can be effective for certain people, and they may make sense. And I've heard some success stories from it, but I just wish that. And this is interesting. I've been talking to more like psychiatrists lately, just through networking, and a lot of the psychiatrists are leaning more into doing blood work versus just jumping into that. Hey, before we're just going to kind of guess, throwing these meds at you based off what you're telling me, let's actually see, like, could we identify a root cause through some blood work analysis.
That's shocking that they didn't before.
Yeah, and my dad, we're affiliated with an organization called World Lake Medical, who's kind of known as the gold standard in advanced like bioidentical hormone prescribing, and they have a lot of courses. But when my dad, when he was going, he said he kept seeing each kind of session or different events that he was going. She's like, there's more psychiatrists coming. This is just so interesting. And another thing too is why they got into it was, when you go on the SSRIs, like that, obviously from a sensory standpoint, it puts more up here and less kind of down here. So they were having libido issues and other things. So then these psychiatrists are trying to figure out how to, like, looking at ED meds, and eventually some of them were putting their patients on hormones to combat the effects of the SSRIs or the SNRIs or these other medications.
People into like a chemistry
so it's really fascinating. And then some of them, from some of the psychiatrists I spoke to, they ended up weaning the patients off the SSRIs and then just had them on the hormone therapy. And they're like, why didn't we do this from day one, of getting some baseline of blood work numbers? So it's very, it's really interesting. I was actually just speaking to a psychiatrist from Puerto Rico about this at length, and he was just very intrigued because it's starting to get, a little more popular, I think, known there. So it's very, very fascinating.
Can I ask you a baseline chemistry question, kind of just off ignorance? So
I got like a C in chemistry.
No, chemistry based on like testosterone and estrogen, okay? So in men and women, we both have estrogen and testosterone, okay? I haven't seen anything, and perhaps this is my ignorance, I haven't seen, estrogen clinics coming up. Mm-hmm. Why is it that these testosterone replacement... Okay, let me ask my question a little bit more intellectually.
Yeah.
There seems to be a market for testosterone that there isn't for estrogen. Why?
Oh, I guess see what you're getting at. Yeah, I mean, I think typically it's not getting branded as like a estrogen replacement clinic. They just say women's health. But yeah, I think just I don't know if it's just from an advertising standpoint, like testosterone
Oh,
gets
so
more
it does
attention.
exist.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like we prescribe estrogen to female patients or estradiol. So like yeah,
That's why
that's
HRT makes more sense than TRT
Yeah.
because it could be also estrogen that you're lacking.
Yeah,
and
that's why we
you-
say HRT because it could be thyroid markers, estrogen, progesterone, the female hormones as well. But it is, I think maybe just because it got so like for men, for example, like most likely if you're deficient in a hormone, it's going to be testosterone first, typically. Then later, some of the other ones decrease, and it just kind of depends. So, and obviously, I think it has a lot of the best benefits from it too. Where if you optimize your testosterone versus saying you just optimize your DHEA, it has a greater effect on the overall body, the testosterone. But yeah, that's an interesting point. I kind of know what you're getting at there, where you don't hear about as much.
Yeah,
and
I'm not like,
yeah, and
hey, women feel like less of a woman. Like,
yeah, and
you
while
see
we're
that all
on
the
that,
time with men.
while we're on the estrogen topic too, this is a really interesting one as well. The old school thought, I would say, from like 90s or early 2000s too, with a lot of the clinics, and I think some of this comes from the bodybuilding industry, where it's the idea was, testosterone high good, estrogen like low is good. Like you want your estrogen low, testosterone high. That's not really necessarily the case. Now, aesthetically, that could be the best because you're holding the least amount of water with lower estrogen levels. You're taking aromatase inhibitors that block, that are blocking estrogen, because testosterone will aromatize in the body. When you inject testosterone or take exogenous testosterone, your body's going to tell itself, okay, need to produce more estrogen to kind of keep up with it. But so like a lot of clinics were then suppressing the estrogen levels and using these compounds like anastrozole, which are typically like breast cancer medications, to suppress overproducing estrogen. But it actually was causing, you weren't getting the full benefit. You don't get the full benefits of testosterone if you suppress the estrogen, because when you take testosterone, you want that additional estrogen because it's good for circulation, it's good for bone density, it's good for heart health. It has all these long lasting benefits. So a lot of the benefits that come from taking testosterone is because of that chain reaction in the body of the estrogen getting produced. Because what we get, I'll see this almost every day. Someone will come to us from another clinic. They'll say, hey, I'm prescribed testosterone and an estrogen blocker. But my libido, I should be feeling better. All my friends feel fucking great, but I don't have a strong sex drive. My joints feel achy. And I'm like, are you on an estrogen blocker? Yeah. Like, okay, how low is it? And they'll tank the estrogen levels. We'll get them off that, and then they'll feel significantly better. Now, there's some people who may overproduce the estrogen when they go on testosterone, and occasionally, like, those medications may make sense. There are outlying scenarios, though, where a lot of the clinics will just take a blanket approach, like I mentioned earlier, just say, hey, you're going to get these 3 meds. So estrogen has a ton of benefits, and that's where it goes hand in hand with testosterone.
If that is the case, would it be ignorant to say that you want to like cap out on both?
Yeah, I mean, you would
If estrogen
with
has its
estrogen.
pros
Yeah,
and
I mean, as
testosterone
far as
has its
speaking,
pros.
and I'm better speaking at like the male side than the female
Forgive
side.
me.
The female side gets it's complex. That's
Let's say this question is for a man.
Yeah.
So like for me, like do I want estrogen and testosterone?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
at the same
ultimately
level, or?
too. Yeah, I mean, and we don't just, and it's important to mention too. We don't. The numbers are a benchmark, but we don't only go off the numbers. We're also going to it's also symptom-based prescribing, because, everyone's hormone receptors are a little bit different. You may not, like me and you might not need the same amount. Like I might need a little more. Hey, you may feel better with a little bit less. Like I always tell people, like, you want to take the least amount possible of any medication that makes you feel good and how you want to feel. But no, to answer your question, like, yeah, there is a range that we may say, because usually if you get to a certain point on either one, side effects eventually come.
Yeah.
Like when you get too high, like there is going to be some side effects that come with that. Estrogen one being kind of water retention, nipple like sensitivity and things like that. But usually, like, our approach though is, instead of throwing someone on an estrogen blocker, which isn't a long-term solution, is, hey, let's just lower your testosterone dose, or let's try a different dosing regimen as far as frequency throughout the week. Maybe we do smaller doses like throughout the week versus the higher doses where it's going to then body's going to produce more estrogen. So that's usually our first course of action versus throwing someone on, an estrogen blocker, which can come with some side effects. Now, if we do prescribe it, it's a low dose and it's in those kind of outlying scenarios. But I would say it's not, in comparison with, in contrast with a lot of clinics, like we don't prescribe it very, very often.
Can I ask you another thing? Because like whenever I'm discussing drugs, usually they're like the happy drugs, right? Like your marijuana, your alcohol, your dopamine hits, or the speeds or the downers kind of thing. The things that inhibit the brain, the function, and whatever correlation they have. With that always comes the term tolerance, because the more of something I take to feel a certain way, subsequently my body will hit like an equilibrium where like, okay, it used to be that I could have a glass of whiskey and I could feel tipsy. But because I've been having so many glasses of whiskey, now it might take 2 to get to that same inebriation that I previously had. Am I incorrect in thinking that the endocrine system with the hormone balance and your various organs in conjunction with the brain, would taking testosterone over the course of time develop a certain tolerance to this external testosterone that's being introduced to the body, to where now I might need more because my body's going to produce less? Am I incorrect in this assumption or assertion?
Yeah,
how does introducing this foreign hormone will affect my body?
It's a great question. So it's not like, hey, if you're on it for a year, all of a sudden your body's not going to respond to it as well, and then you're going to have to increase your dose.
The dosage.
Yeah, it doesn't really work like that, just because it's a little different to where it is like testosterone, your body produces it. So what we prescribe is like bioidentical to the body. So ultimately, no, it's not like, hey, you don't build up a tolerance to it where it like doesn't work as well. Now at the beginning when you take it, like, because you went from feeling like shit to then feeling good in a fairly short amount of time.
The delta is so
then
dramatic.
I think mentally after like a year, like, hey, you feel good, but you don't have that like big swing all of a sudden where it's like, it's going to flatline eventually. We're like, hey, this is good. And then you're still going to age. Like, I'm not going to say like, sit here and say like, it can work probably, it can work wonders for people, but it's not, this miracle drug to where like, hey, it's all, you're still going to age and there's going to be wear and tear on the body. This just is going to help feel like it's slowing down the process some, and your quality of life is better as you age because you have more energy or less joint pain, or able to work out more, hold more muscle mass, carry less visceral fat. And it's not an addictive compound either.
I don't know you can say that.
Yeah, well,
because anything that correlates to a positive reaction, in my opinion, can then be correlated
more
to addiction.
To a certain extent,
now,
yes.
not
but
to
now,
the average person, but
I'll say this in contrast with the other like scheduled drugs like your
much more
oxycodone and
mild.
things like that. Yeah, I mean that's you're someone that takes one of those where eventually like, hey, they need 10 in a short period of time, within months. It's not like, hey, all of a sudden like. You're not going to want to take a couple thousand milligrams of like testosterone like a week. Like you're going to feel like shit. So I think like there is that diminishing point, but there is that diminishing point of return where it's going to have an adverse effect.
I guess the only reason I say that, Jeff, so just so you don't feel attacked, is
you're good.
For years, I've heard
I
my
got
friends.
thick skin. You're good.
I forgive me. The only reason I'm saying this is for years I've heard my friends that are on the marijuana side talk about how marijuana is not addicting, marijuana is not this, marijuana. Now I have a slew of friends that cannot function if they don't immediately hit the bong in the morning.
Yeah.
Or they have to take an edible to go to work, or like, oh my God, I was having a mental breakdown, so I had to do this joint. And I'm just like, that's an addiction.
Yeah.
If I told you I can't do a podcast without a shot of whiskey before, you would tell me, what? That doesn't sound too good, brother. Like, why do you need to take this thing? And this is kind of goes to that original thing of where I have that adherence to it, right? Is because for my whole life, I never liked the thought that I needed something to maintain baseline. Mm-hmm. The idea of I'm happy how I am, but if I smoke a little or I drink a little, we can amplify it for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
The inherent bias that I have against taking testosterone is this thought process that I have of like, by the way, not like I'm in the market. I'm just kind of doing a
Yeah.
little devil's advocate. Forgive me.
Yeah.
It's like, well, do I want to be beholden onto this curriculum now? Where right now my life might be, below average to what I was previously used to, but in the pursuit of increasing my quality of life, I am now beholden to this thing. This thing could be testosterone, it could be estrogen, whatever my blood work says. Do you think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that some people might not like that they have to take something to feel a certain way, and that can also be a hindrance to this pharmaceutical, this
Yeah.
medical practice?
Yeah, I hear that argument for sure, but I view it differently where if you're deficient in vitamins and minerals, you take a multivitamin. So like I think like where do you draw the line there? Because it's across the board. And this is I brought this up numerous times just regarding the stigma, where think about growing up, you would hear maybe could be your parents, friends, parents, just older people talking about like thyroid issues. Oh, I got to take my thyroid med. Okay, well, you're deficient in like T3, T4. No one thought anything of it at all. It's not that significantly different because, hey, here's something else that the body produces that is got low at a certain point of life that we're taking a medication that's mirroring what's in the body to get it to a level where it should be or what replace what you lost essentially. So I think I mean that's kind of how I view it, where it's like if you're deficient in these minerals and vitamins, like hey, we're gonna go and supplement like with the multivitamins. So I don't think we're at that point yet, but like I feel the pendulum, like I've felt it with just being in the industry like for some time now. Like I feel the pendulum shifting, and I have for several years now, where it's becoming more accepted. All the people that used to tell me, "Oh, I would never do that. I never need that." Like, oh, they're calling me now and like, "Hey, I want to get started on it." So like I think that's changing quite a bit, but I definitely like see where you're coming from that argument. And then I want to clarify too is that with testosterone, this is one of the biggest misconceptions is that once you're on it for life. Okay, like I don't know where that came from, but like that's something that's like it gets thrown out there a lot. Now, when you take exogenous testosterone, your body does stop producing. It may produce some, but for the most part, there's going to be a significant level shut down with your natural production. Now, if you're not concerned about fertility, like that doesn't necessarily matter, and that's kind of a whole nother topic. But just for the sake of testosterone and going off of it, there's just a right way and wrong way to go off of it. If you're going to go off of like there is medication you could take to stimulate your natural production. That you don't have to take that long. And typically, like we'll have people that for whatever, it's a personal choice. Like I said earlier, if you want to go off of it, no problem. Just let us know. Let us guide you through that process. Because if you just abruptly stop it, your body will kickstart its own production. It's just going to take several months. It's going to take longer versus kind of chemically inducing it like to happen quicker, like with an HCG or one of these other similar medications to stimulate production.
Well, also to that point, if in your example of when I was talking about tolerance, you were saying that like if you're at a certain level and then you immediately introduce your body to the testosterone, that feeling or that delta is so vast because you went from like a baseline to how you should be feeling. Well, then the inverse would also be true. So like if you're used to taking this testosterone and feeling it, like let's say you were at 300, right? And now you're at 1,000, which you should have been at 1,000. That vast change in such a short amount of time will be very prevalent to you, your lifestyle, how you feel.
Yeah.
Vice versa. If you're at that 1,000 and then you just cut off and go back to 300, well, then the inverse should be true. That the vast deficiency in my quality of life will be abruptly obvious. So it's like, for what makes it good, will also make it bad.
Yeah. Because ultimately when someone stops, like the goal ultimately then is just to get them back to that number where they're at that brought them to you. So like stimulate some of the natural production again. So like it is kind of back to square one, to your point. So yeah, but I just wanted to clarify that because that's one of the biggest misconceptions I see is like, once you're on it forever. And it's like, well, no, not necessarily. You just want to be guided through it. And as far as I know, we talked a little earlier about, when you take some and you feel good and you want to take more. So I think it's regulated. So like you're only going to get it's a controlled medication now. So like you're only going to get a certain amount of dose in a certain time frame. Now, if someone's going to go to the black market and get it, I mean, obviously that's a little different. If they're not going to, if they're not going to go to a clinic, but hey, if it's someone that's saying, hey, I'm going to do this in a medical setting and do it legally, there's only so many vials that can get prescribed in a short amount of time. Because
I would make the argument, though. Remember what we were discussing earlier about like kind of like our youth and our ignorance and all that. And as we've aged, we've become wiser. I find it hard pressed that a 42-year-old would start looking for black market testosterone.
Man, you'd be surprised.
Really?
You'd be so surprised.
You were telling me that 42-year-olds, or 42 is a very specific number, forgive me, people that are a little bit older and wiser can also feel or fall susceptible or prey to some of the same circumstances of their youth and get black market testosterone when they have like the safer, more, in my opinion, when I think of like getting blood work and getting the correct dosage of testosterone, I'm no longer thinking performance. Like, I'm not trying to be the best fucking fighter in the world. I'm trying to live a good quality of life. So when I'm thinking to myself, like, I want to see a physician, I want to get my blood work, I want to get the correct amount of testosterone, because too little, then there's that opportunity gap of like, how much better could I feel? But too much, now we have the side effects, we're kind of overdoing it, the endocrine system stress and all this other stuff. I would want to go to a physician, and I'm 32 years old. Yeah. You're telling me that there could be people slightly older than me. I would try to equate age with wisdom that wouldn't necessarily follow this chain of logic.
Yeah, there's some people, like, I think it's gotten a little tougher to access than it was, but like
testosterone,
as far as like on the black market.
Oh, okay. Okay.
They did. There was something recently that the New Jersey Port Authority got there's a lot of vials trying to get in, and there are some black market sites out there, but there is no, there's no oversight of who's producing those. So it could just be, hey, someone's getting the powder overseas, suspending it in the oil themselves in their garage, which I don't know how sterile like some of these places are. And I've heard some just kind of some horror stories over the years of people like getting infections or the testosterone turning like, different colors over time. So I would say like, and I'm not like, obviously I don't know like that anyone really getting from a black market source or anything like anymore. I used to hear stories about it, but like I think that market's kind of dwindling. And the people that we talk to are people that maybe they have done that before. Hey, no judgment on our part, because they're making a decision to say, hey, I'm going to do it right. I want to get blood work. I don't want to guess. And I've talked to people too where they try to do blood work on their own, and their blood work was all over, it was all over the place, and it didn't make sense. Where I was like, well, it clearly isn't dosed properly from vial to vial, because this doesn't make any sense if you think you're taking the same. So there's a lot of risks that come with the black market, like the black market drugs for obvious reasons.
You bring up a good point. This was actually a question I wanted to ask you, was like, so I deal in data, like my job is in information systems, right? Mm-hmm. And a point is just a data plot. 2 points is now a trend, right? Mm-hmm. When you do this blood work, is it just one time? Because I don't know if that's necessarily, and I'm interested to hear what you think about this. If I were you, I would want as many, like, hey, come in this month, every Sunday, we're going to do your blood work. Yeah. Okay. And if on the first Sunday you're at 110, and at the second Sunday you're at 109, and at the third Sunday you're at 108. Well, now I see where your testosterone levels are going. Not only are they low, but they're getting worse. But what if it's the inverse? Like they're going from 160 to 170 to 180. Okay, are you changing your lifestyle? I guess what I'm trying to say is I like the idea of blood work to really get some data on where you are at versus I'm feeling a certain way, right?
Yeah.
But is it just one point in time that you're doing this? I don't know if that's necessarily adequate, right?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go through that. So I know I just mentioned like those baseline numbers before someone starts. So once someone does start treatment, say I'll use our clinic as the example.
Forgive me, I don't mean to interrupt. How many blood tests do you do to initiate treatment? Is it just one?
Oh, on that? Yeah. Oh, to initiate treatment. Gotcha.
Forgive me.
Yeah, to initiate treatment, yeah, it will go off that. It'll go off that one because, for example, if you come and you're at 200 nanograms per deciliter of testosterone, it's not like, well, hey, he had a rough night's sleep and did some hard training this morning. He's going to be back up to 800 tomorrow. Like that is where the misconception comes in because people be like, oh, I worked out heavy, so it's changed my number. Like the swing is not near as much as people think it is. And we've kind of, me and my dad are kind of nerds with this stuff as well. Where like we've played around with like doing like really frequent tests with some people as well to see where it fluctuates. Like that swing is just not what people think it is. So we would prescribe based on that initial one for those very reasons. Like it's not going to change that significantly. And we're meeting with the patients to talk through them to get a kind of an understanding from a lifestyle standpoint, what they're currently dealing with, and also symptoms, how long have the symptoms been happening. But that's a great question though. And what, just to kind of fast forward to what I was mentioning too, once someone does start treatment, we'll do the follow-up blood work 6-week point. We'll do that again at the 90-day point.
And test that against baseline. This is where you were, this is where you're at.
See where you at. Maybe we're tweaking the dosing because really those first few months is like honing in on the dose is the key. How are you feeling? Where are the marks? So let's correlate how you're feeling with the numbers and use both of those to determine the course of treatment, like moving forward of what numbers, need to be manipulated. But then after that, first 90 days, we may do blood work every 6 months. Some patients, it could be quarterly. There could be different panels. Like what the best way that I could explain our clinic's approach, it would say it's personalized care. It is not going to be the same for everyone. So it's kind of the anti-cookie cutter of like, hey, you'll only get these set labs every time or these set medication, these set doses. It could look a little bit different for all the patients there, which I think that's where we've kind of stood out in the market to a certain extent of where people have gravitated towards us because they've seen that personalized care and thoroughness is where they want to come versus, and I call it in the industry, I think I just call them mills. Like you may hear the terminology pill mills or testosterone mills, where it's kind of that, cookie cutter protocol with very, with very limited follow-up care manipulation as you go. It's kind of just, hey, here's your meds. See you later. It's kind of how it works. So I think we're kind of that anti-model to that, where it's more personalized care, thorough care as well.
Well, that's the value add. And I don't mean this to sound like rude, but like you're not developing like the next technological innovation, right? You're developing a program in which to introduce people to a hormone, but that hormone is testosterone. How much can you really, I'm sure there's some sort of research and development that you can make to make it like maybe more potent, less volume for more efficiency or effectiveness. But ultimately, that service side that you're talking about, that patient care, that extra mile in terms of making someone feel, even if it's just a feeling of special, that's the real value add. Because what you're saying is like, hey, there's a lot of places where you can get testosterone. You would want to come to us because we're going to do the extra due diligence, right? Yeah. So like that's the value add. Why are you different from the competitor? Well, X, Y, and Z. It's not the testosterone. It's the way in which we do the blood work or the way in which we interact with you, the due diligence we give to the results. That would be the differing opinion or the differentiating factor between you and a direct competitor.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, very fair. And not to say we're the only ones doing it that way. There's a lot of
But you take pride in the way you do it.
Yeah, there's a lot of very reputable clinics who take similar approaches with that level of care, like in the industry. So that's like good to see. And I think just the heightened level of awareness and the more, one thing that, I've been wanting to do, like this past year, we're kind of leaning into it more into this year's more collaboration with other providers, other clinics, other folks in the industry, more like continuing ed. I think one of the mistakes, I think when you a lot of people do is probably when you first get into business, you just view everyone as, everyone's my competitor, and you're thinking you're doing something this proprietary as well, where it's like, I don't want to talk to them. Where now it's like, hey, there's a lot of ways we could work together. I think a rising tide lifts all ships, especially where we're at in the industry now.
If everybody's operating in good faith.
You're right. But
because I love the way that you think that.
Yeah.
And I want you to be right. I've just seen that not play out all the time.
I've just been trying to take more of an open-minded approach to that, to
I
where
think
it's
it's
like,
beautiful.
hey, it's okay. Like let's share kind of what we're doing and what's working and what's not working. So like we're really like leaning into that more of like communicating with some of these other providers and doctors.
I just
'cause,
hope
like,
they're reciprocating.
yeah, no, it's been like mutually beneficial, but that was a big mindset shift to me when we got to the point we are at now with the business, where I'm like, gosh, it'd be nice. Like, how did they streamline this process, or how did they do this, or maybe it's something with sourcing and stuff where I didn't want to view like, hey, everyone is a competitor, everything's a secret. Like, it's okay to collaborate, like to a certain extent. I feel like so we've gotten a lot more open minded with that, and we have a really good like tech team with our clinic. So definitely like proud of the processes that they built out and the systems that they built out, and with some of the automation just to help enhance like the patient experience. We're like, yes, we have automation, but that's always coupled with a human there as well to kind of to help like chime in and guide throughout the process. But that's been one of the biggest mindset shifts I said for me, like kind of going into this year is, hey, let's get out there. One of our other business partners, me and him, been talking about it a lot. Like, let's start going to more of these events. Let's start building some relationships in the industry as well. And I think that way too, you can kind of develop and being a thought leader too. But I think I'm hopeful there's more. It seems to be that there's more people open to doing that now that the industry's grown some.
I hope you're right, but I also think that the way you did it was the proper way to do it, because I see a lot of people that want to go to like these cons, like CONS, like not like a con artist, but
I
like,
gotcha. Yeah.
like they have one for automotive industry, for healthcare, whatever, like in Vegas and all these other things. They want to go to these things without necessarily the proper business model in place already, the product self-sufficient, and they want to automatically. I do agree with your network is your net worth, but your worth in that network is what value you provide to it.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of guys that know a lot of people that are useless.
Yeah.
Meaning they are useless, but they know a lot of people. Congratulations, you can help no one. And I know some people that are very useful that know no one. And I would rather the latter than the former, because I can get that person to that next level because there's value there.
Yeah.
I can't get the guy who knows everybody to be valuable.
Yeah.
Because if he was smart enough on his own, he would have become valuable on his own. So I think the way you're kind of approaching this of like, hey, we developed this business, we developed this product, we developed this style in which we approach this industry. Well, now, dude, the latter half, the networking, the relationship building, in my opinion, that's the easier of the two.
Yeah. And
you already did the heavy lifting.
And another thing too, I think what's bringing, I think, a lot of people together in the industry too is that we've been working off of like temporary extensions, like post public health emergency as well. They're still kind of figuring out a path of how to do. And not a surprise, the government took a little longer than anticipated with what they're trying to do. So they kind of just keep kicking the can with it. So there's some uncertainty, and there's a lot more lobbying groups involved now. But I think a lot of like the mid-size clinics are kind of getting together and having more of a voice
with telehealth, or
I would say that extends beyond just hormones. That's the telehealth.
There's no way that genie is going back in the bottle.
That's what that's what my dad says. His always says, well, shit, it's been over 4 years now, and once you give something like that, it's hard to get away. So we're at this turning point now where everything's
you've
extended.
Also proven that you can do it. That's the thing. We've done it for 4 years. Present the argument of why we can't do it for the next 4.
Their biggest concern, they being whether it be DA, HHS, is it's oversight. It's just oversight and there's going to be bad actors in any space, and there was
Let
a
the
lot
market decide.
Yeah, there was a lot that popped up in telehealth, and they've been making examples of some, mostly with the Adderall prescribing and the advertising on TikTok. There's a couple of really large companies they went after.
Now you're speaking my language.
Now you're we're talking like close to $1 billion in revenue with some of these. So they put a target on their back with how they're doing it. So I think that was where it's, hey, how can we increase access to healthcare, but have necessary guardrails?
Can I add a different paradigm to this?
Sure.
Why is the government oversighting the drugs that people are taking? Outside of, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be government oversight in terms of like the quality of something, right? I don't want testosterone laced with whatever, or or improper synthesized
Yeah.
testosterone at a lab that is not meeting certain criteria. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, if there is $1 billion of Adderall flowing in and out of states and into the hands, and the marketplace is that big, well, who are you to, like, prevent the people from buying that? Your prevention should not necessarily be to oversight the industry. It should be to be quality control. And the greatest quality control is the market. You see it in real time. And I hate to say it this way, but how many people no longer do party drugs because of this epidemic of overdosing on foreign agents introduced into drugs?
Yeah.
I know kids now, when I was in high school, I'm sure it was similar to you. We would go out, I was 18, 19, 20. I would party, I would drink, I would smoke a little bit, do whatever. I never had to worry about it being laced with, whatever it could be laced with.
Fentanyl now.
Fentanyl is like the prime, but there was drugs before fentanyl, let's be honest, right? So, like, what I'm trying to say is the only oversight that government should really have is in the quality control, and maybe that's what you're alluding to, but not the industry. If people are buying Adderall in mass, what that tells me is that there's a market for Adderall. You should not be stifling the market for Adderall. You should just make sure that the Adderall is quality Adderall. If people want to take drugs, we have learned throughout our lifetime and before that the war on drugs, is a losing battle. Now, if you want to create, you have to be 18 years for this. Like, for instance, testosterone. I don't think anybody under the age of 18 should be taking testosterone, or maybe even 21, based on this, that, or the other, unless they take blood work and it's like, this person for whatever reason has this deficiency, and we are at this point doing a disservice for not providing him this. Fair.
Yeah, there's some pituitary disorders
I'm
where there are some techniques to use, like to take the testosterone to help induce puberty.
They have human growth hormone, and they have all that for kids as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
there's a market there with, like, pediatric endocrinologists who oversee that. But
to it.
There is, significant amount.
Why is the government getting involved in this?
Yeah.
Because I would also say that the market will then take hold. If you are providing a quality service at a quality price with, quality product, then you will grow. And if there are bad actors, I'm not saying that there won't be, but if there are bad actors, they will weed themselves out. Am I incorrect in this assertion?
I think with, like, the Adderall, and the example that I saw was, it was like they weren't acting compliantly to the current laws, but it was like marketing to 18, 19-year-olds of, month cash practice, marketing through TikTok and whatnot. And they were prescribing pretty high doses, I think, at a high pill volume as well. And to my knowledge, like, that's an addictive, not something I've been prescribed. I know it's like an addictive chemical and whatnot. Like, it's essentially like amphetamine salts mostly. So, like, I think it's that
one chemical away from morphine. Not morphine. Cocaine.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some concerns there, like, where I do think in some instances, like a guardrail, there has to be like a, some checks and balances there as well. Like, I don't know if they're doing like the, like, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know what they're doing from an intake standpoint to determine, hey, here's why we're prescribing this.
The only reason I say this is because we have proven. By the way, do you want another one?
Oh no, I'm good.
Okay. The only reason I say this is we have proven that in the absence of availability, people will go to more and more scarce, resource-driven, risk-riddled avenues, right? If I want Coke, because we want to do Coke tonight, I will find Coke from wherever that source is. And I will pay the premium if I have to, and God be damned where it came from, because we want to party tonight. What I'm trying to say is there's a market for it. And that market could be diluted based on, like, we said fentanyl in terms of, like, external agents that can be added to it, duly noted. But what I'm also saying is, did the fentanyl epidemic stop people from taking drugs? No. There are people willing to risk their lives for a good time. Okay? Yeah. It would venture me to say that people are also willing to risk that for a constant state of life, whether that's testosterone, whether that's Adderall, what have you. I don't think the government is in place to inhibit a market. I think they should only be in place to quality control that market. Now, if the quality is of not an adequate value, then I guess by virtue you will say that they will inhibit the market. Duly noted.
Yeah.
But what the
Yeah,
reason I'm
I
bringing
think-
this up is because we were talking about the telemarket, the telehealth industry that
Yeah.
kind of emerged post COVID, getting put back in. Why? Why are we even having this discussion? If this has been done and it's been proven to be okay, then only go after the bad actors, the people that are doing Adderall laced with something or overprescribing or whatever. It should not be a question of legislation that's like a broad stroke against everybody.
I agree.
Go against the
Yeah.
bad actors.
Oh, of course. And I think their biggest issue now is just it's the ability to catch the bad actors is where it becomes a challenge. And there's the prescription drug monitoring program referred to as the PMP, which it's just a little archaic. Not all the states talk, because that's at the state DA level where not all the state systems talk to each other. Some of them do. So the request kind of, from the market and everyone who's gone to the DEA like Q&A sessions is to, hey, let's have a national database of the where all the systems talk to each other across all states.
Finance has that.
Could have an algorithm set. Now, the problem with this is just kind of I'm speculating here purely, but from what I know, just within the government on the tech side, is I don't think they're going to have to kick that out to the private sector to build that system.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's going to go out for RFP. That they're going to have to let that go for 6+ months. It take numerous bids. Then
RFP also, for those that might not be initiated, is a request for a proposal.
Yeah, and so I foresee it being a big animal to tackle over the next couple. I think it's going to be several years until they can have those proper guardrails in place.
Duly noted. Yeah. But in the meantime, you don't stifle the market.
Yeah, I agree completely. And to their credit, they haven't. Like they have gone in and extended these temporary. Like we're on like the 4th, 5th temporary extension now, and so
spoiler warning, probably won't be the last.
Yeah, exactly. And they should have extended out to 2026. But we'll get questions on the time like, hey, is this going to? I'm like, no. The way the wind is blowing, it is more access to healthcare, and I think both sides of the aisle want to. They don't want to be the ones saying, "Hey, we're going to limit healthcare access," especially in rural areas, or areas where they're underserved with providers. And this has just opened up a whole new avenue for people.
One party's for deregulation, the other party is for access to healthcare. You'll be fine.
Yeah, and so I definitely think the way the wind's been blowing is, hey, let's open up the access, but just determine how to do it. And that's what they can't, haven't been able to land on. But I think they'll get there. It's just gonna take some more time. But I think it was a great call. Like during, I think the argument could be made with some of these medications, like that should they be controlled or not? Like testosterone was never controlled until there was like the 1990 anabolic steroid act, where it got lumped in with all these other steroids that don't, because like testosterone is the only thing that the body makes that's a controlled substance somehow. So there is a movement and some new lobbying groups that have come out. One being called the Testosterone Project, which has some reputable names, I think, from an online platform standpoint of and not to say they're not good doctors or anything by any means, but that are more popular. There's a movement to deschedule to get it descheduled testosterone. So like I think that could happen in definitely like in our lifetime. I think it's going to take some time for sure, but I foresee it going that way. The more we kind of learn about it,
I would say the winds of change are not just for that. I think you're going to see, especially with this generation that's coming up, a just separation of the government controlling what people are doing with their bodies, from abortion to what drugs they take. I think that the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, I think that the DEA, I think some of these 3-letter agencies will always exist, and they should, because they do provide a value. But I think the footprint that they have will diminish over the course of time, because I think the market has spoken, and the market says that we want drugs. We want safe drugs, so maybe it goes from enforcement to quality control or quality assurance, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of like being the police of drugs, they go from the executive to more of a QA role, which I would like. I would like for the government to be like, this gets the FDA stamp of approval, like we did for meat and produce and things like that. Also for drugs, you abide by these standards. Okay, your testosterone gets the the stamp of approval from us.
Yeah.
And if people don't go about the same way you do, then they don't get that stamp of approval. And then for me, who might not know who you are, and maybe I'm Google searching, I'm only going to go to the reputable dealers, and the reputable dealers are the ones that work in conjunction with the government. But the government is not the police of it; they're
Right.
just the QA of it. I
Exact-
think it's a fundamentally different.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And like the best example I can use is where like the pharmacies that we work with are registered with the FDA, subjected to
Their testing.
inspections, and there are quality control processes laid out that they have to follow with how they're producing the medications versus like obviously the black market. There is not that, so like it does mitigate the level of risk. Not to say things couldn't go wrong from time to time, but there are guidelines that they're following from a production and sterility standpoint. So I completely agree with you there. That definitely makes sense. So
I just think it's the natural progression.
Yeah.
You can't police everybody, and you're going to exhaust resources trying to.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to police people, work with the people that mean well, like when we were talking about kind of exchanging information across the industry to kind of build a better product and kind of learn from one another. That's only works if you're in good faith. Well, maybe you only do that with other people that are operating good faith in terms of like quality control and all these other things. They're checking the boxes, so to speak. And then for me, as maybe a first time consumer of product, I might be very ignorant towards all these things. Yes, there's like podcasts and news articles and all these things, but let's just say it's my very first Google search, and I just want to find a company that I know I won't die if I take product, right? Like that's the base threshold. Is it safe to consume kind of thing, right?
Sure.
I think that's the general trajectory of it, and that in that we will also create an efficiency to what government should have been, and that's never been Big Brother. That has been the stamp of approval.
Yeah.
Whenever we start to get to the policing of it, well, now you're policing an industry that knows this better than you. What are we doing?
Yeah. And I do think, and I know we haven't like touched on this yet, but as far as the peptide space is always it's a very interesting one. And for like someone not familiar with, peptides, they're basically sequences of a amino acids. So there's numerous types of them, but there's some that are made to basically stimulate growth hormone. Like there's GH peptides, growth hormone peptides, where they're made to stimulate your pituitary to produce like some of its own growth hormone. So it's different than HGH in itself, but the FDA regulates the peptide space, and there was some last year, 2023, September, some got pulled and deemed dangerous, but it was based on these very small subset of studies that they made those bases off of. So I think that's where I think it's going to change drastically. There's already talk about it like into 2025 is we're going to see a lot of these peptides that were banned are going to be coming back to the market. Like ipamorelin was one of them, BPC-157.
Why were peptides ever banned? What was the thought process?
I mean, I think with some of it is, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I think there's some you have like, if it's not a product that can be like, patented, or if you have big pharma versus small pharma, where if it's getting in the way of, big pharma's profits, where, hey, I can just go to the compounding pharmacy, or a provider go through the compounding pharmacy. So it could potentially cut into their profits. So I think that is where we see some of that.
Forgive me, just so I understand words. When you say big pharma and small pharma, what is that distinction to you?
Like big pharma would be like, obviously like your Pfizer's and
Johnson & Johnson,
sure,
the monoliths in
and
the
then
industry.
I say, small pharmacy, I say the compounding pharmacies, where they will make patient specific medications like on demand, and then they'll also, one thing people probably aren't aware of, but if there are, say, medications go on the FDA shortage list that it is patented, that there's a green light to the compounding pharmacies to be able to produce that medication and sell it. Now, then things can go off the shortages, they couldn't. So yeah, that's where so it serves a place for sure. There's a guy who's actually on Joe Rogan a lot, named Brigham Bueller. We actually partner with one of his pharmacies, and he owns a company, Ways to Well, and Revive RX, where he's a really great source to go to and listen to on Rogan. He's from the big pharmacy. He worked for Big Pharma, now owns his own compounding pharmacy, which I think he's actually stepping away from here soon. He's very tight with RFK, so it's very interesting. But I've been listening to a lot of his stuff. But he's a great resource to listen. Knows way more about it than I do on that side. But my prediction is with the peptides, I think a lot of those are going to start coming back. Just cellular medicine in general, I think will get more popular because they're kind of always coming and going with the peptides. But like you've probably heard of BPC, right? So like BPC got taken away, but then there's other equivalent versions. Like one of the medications we prescribe is called penidecapeptide arginate, which is almost the same as BPC, but it has a arginate instead of acetate. And it's a really popular like in the jiu-jitsu world because of the anti-inflammatory properties or partial tendon and ligament tears. You can actually do site injections around, let's say an elbow injury. I was just thinking of a couple guys we had from jiu-jitsu who you actually know. You would just kind of inject around the area and it could help. It can have some healing factors in it to help. So that's peptides, I think, is one that's going to really get more popular like as we go forward, and there's less kind of regulation around them.
Do you deal in both of these, both testosterone?
We do.
HRT and peptides?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. There's quite a few peptides that we'll prescribe, but we'll do both. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of peptides where some people might not be candidates for them if they're like have a really high IGF-1 level already, because there's kind of a point of diminishing return there. Insulin-like growth factor.
Thank you. Whenever we're doing acronyms, because I know some of them. I don't know all of them. I'm sure some viewers know none of them.
Yeah.
Forgive me.
And there's some peptides that are, kind of geared more towards the weight loss side. It could be weight loss, some are muscle building. So I think you're going to see more of the peptides like come out for sure. We're going to see in the years to come. I think it's going to become a more accepted form of treatment.
Accepted in the place of what, like pharmaceutical drugs?
I think with medications getting like FDA approval. Yeah, I would say that within like the eyes of the government, I would say, because I know RFK had already kind of sent out a tweet to say like, hey, he wants to, FDA approve peptides and then pull some that were off the ban list that should have never been there, and getting those off the list.
What do you think of the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement that RFK Jr. is kind of spearheading? Do you think that it is a little hyperbolic? Do you think that it is long overdue? I don't necessarily want to get into the nuance of every nitty gritty. I'm talking about more the macro. Like,
yeah.
Do you think we have a public health epidemic in this country?
I do. I mean, I don't think obviously a lot of people have opinions about him, but if you've noticed,
separate the guy from the act.
And if you notice though, no one can really argue him on the processed foods and like the food and quality control. Like, I haven't seen anyone like come up with a good argument to say that. Even the people that like hate him now are like, hey, he's kind of got a point about the processed food and the food dyes and it's like a lot of that stuff that he's bringing to the forefront. I didn't know like, oh, hey, like this in Canada, this type of, they have to produce their Fruit Loops this way. In the US, just throw like whatever in there.
Red
from the color.
40, yellow 30 in there, whatever.
It kind of gets scary once you start like.
Also, once you start realizing what those things are made out of, like by petroleum byproducts, we're literally putting toxins in our body because they make yellow a little brighter.
Yeah, and I have not seen any with that specific movement you're referencing. Like, I haven't seen anything to me that didn't seem like logical yet from what part of that movement.
Talking about in opposition or in that movement?
I'm sorry, I haven't seen anything that's not logical. Like just in that movement, that like everything they're saying in the messaging. Now, how they're in. I think another thing too. There's a lot of like. I think one thing they'll try to sort through too is a lot of the government overlap between the different agencies as well. Like between
some would say
HHS,
there may be too many agencies.
Yeah, I think it's up. Is it 380 something now or something? It's a lot. Like,
just wait. Tomorrow there might be another one.
Yeah, it's a lot. So and I don't know, but that movement though. Yeah, I've been following it a little bit. Like all of it sounds great. You just have to see like how quickly. What I found was fascinating was before he's got approved or anything, gone through the Senate approval or
By the way,
confirmation.
for the record, we are recording this as of January 19th. I don't believe he's been confirmed yet.
He has not yet.
Okay,
so I
so
think
just
that's
so we're
coming
clear
up
on
this
date.
week.
Yes,
So I know you
they're
like
going through the whole cabinet now.
So
I'm just giving context.
yeah,
to when we're talking about this.
but they've already started banning like some of the dyes and got out ahead of it before he came
because they know that there's
Uh,
no logical explanation
yeah.
for adding these things. So it's like the low-hanging fruit, right? The things that you can't combat.
Yeah.
I can't fight for this, so we're just going to ban it now.
Yeah, but I think very valid points of the moon. I'm very curious to see like what happens and how much. What we've seen though is just they've been good at getting attention and spreading awareness. Like I think the timing
that's
of
half the battle.
Yeah, I think so too, and the timing of how they did it. I mean, it would kind of be predicted the way he was talking at the end of his campaign, RFK specifically. But yeah, it's been. I'm very, very curious what's going to happen the next few years and what changes. I know he's mentioned like beef tallow instead of the seed
Or
oils.
raw milk. I mean, raw milk seems to be like the low-hanging fruit in terms of the ones that you can argue. Here's my thing, right? The same notion that I take to when I was talking about Adderall and drugs and stuff like that, I also take that same thing with regards to like food. That the FDA's original inception was because there was I forget the exact year, forgive me, but in American history, and Adrian, keep me honest on this one, essentially there was like this epidemic of bad meat, okay, where like meat was coming out from the U.S. producers and causing like wide swarm E. coli, meat that was branded a certain way that was actually different animals or in conjunction with different animals. And the FDA was literally birthed as a way to not police these people, but to quality assure, essentially say, we're going to go into your factories, we're going to go into your meat processing industries, and we're going to make sure that A, you're up to a certain code of health, sterilization, all these other things, and B, that like everything you're doing is, yes, ma'am.
1906.
Thank you. But that's why the FDA.
With your story, though.
Okay, it was more. Thank you so much, because I knew I was somewhat right. I was losing.
Teddy Roosevelt comes back up again.
Teddy,
Okay.
one of the greatest presidents. That's why he's on Mount Rushmore. Forgive me and thank you, Adrian. Shout out Adrian, our producer. Essentially, the FDA was never intended to be what it is today. It was always intended to work in conjunction with these industries of varying varieties. Like it started with meat, and as do all things with the federal government, they start to expand with scope. What I'm trying to say is, in this effort to make America healthy again, I believe the federal government has overstepped its boundaries in terms of what the market will allow. You allow for raw milk and you allow for pasteurized milk and let the people decide based on what they feel the market will dictate.
Yeah, I
if you
agree
allow
with
for
that.
peptides and for, you have peptides on one eye. I'm kind of simplifying it, forgive me. But let's say you walk into a supermarket and there's peptides on one side of the aisle, and on the other side of the aisle is like, a J&J product. And over the
or just an anti-inflammatory medication that can have
That-
like it's one or the other. That would be a good analogy.
Forgive me,
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh, sorry.
That already exists, that maybe is over the counter, quote unquote. And what you do is you allow for the market to decide over the course of time what they prefer based on the price, based on how they feel, yada, yada, yada. What you don't do is say that the anti-inflammatory is banned or that the peptide is banned, unless it's specifically proven to not be safe. And that's where I go to quality assurance. You're not regulating, like you're not policing one thing over another based on information that you have not produced, right?
Yeah.
You have to do the due diligence and then come up with the conclusion. Because right now it feels more like a police entity, less a quality assurance entity. You could have a vastly different opinion on this, and if you do, I would love to hear it. But where do you think I stand with my summation of not just the FDA, but the narrative of where the federal government lies with some of its regulatory agencies and its methodology for how it kind of intertwines with the industries of America?
Yeah. Have you ever listened to Patrick Bet David?
A little bit, yeah.
That's his kind of his. He'll say, "Let the market decide." I think there's a lot of truth and a lot of weight to that, letting the market decide. And I like the analogy you used to say, "Hey, if it's because I think letting the people take control over their own health as well, doing their own education, surrounding it, and so I do believe in that approach, letting the market decide. But I get it. There's a fine line there as far as like, hey, where is from a regulation standpoint. Like I think that like you hit the nail on the head with the QA piece, like with the quality assurance, where like as a business owner who like we can't be a clinic and a pharmacy in the state of Missouri. You can't own both. It's illegal. So we have to like we can't produce it ourselves. We have to go to these third parties to source it. So I like the idea that there are some checks and balances there from a quality standpoint and some regulation there.
Another factor to that is what you were talking about regarding like the transfer of information between competitors on a business front. The government should be reminiscent to the referee in a basketball game, where essentially we're all playing by the same rules. We're all offering the same value and all that other stuff. The only thing they're doing is making sure that everybody is curtailing to the same rule set, right? Mm-hmm. So like when I say the QA, I'm not preventing you from doing what it is that you're wanting to do, as long as it's like not causing, severe illness or anything like that. But what I am saying is like, I as the government am not in your industry. So I can go to your clinic, I can go to a direct competitor's clinic, I can go to this clinic, and based on like what I'm seeing, I can start to develop business, like, cross business industry practices. And then that becomes the QA. So you're actually outsourcing that infrastructure for information transfer to the government, saying, hey, your testosterone has a half-life of, and I'm just making up variables, forgive me, but for the sake of argument, your testosterone has a half-life of 10 days. Everybody else in the industry, from what we've been able to deduce, is 15. You no longer have our stamp of approval because you're not up to the industry standards. You would not have known that unless you were telling everybody else, hey, our half-life is 10 days. What's your half-life? They could be lying to you. They could be bad actors. You have no idea. They could be like, oh yeah, ours is 10 days too.
Yeah.
Now they have a competitive advantage over you. But in the effect of the government stepping in to create that quality assurance, you now as a member of that industry actually get benefit from the government, not just see them as a hindrance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does.
I went down a bit of a rabbit hole. I'm so sorry.
You already warned me beforehand. You said you like to talk.
When it comes to this stuff, I think there is a place for a federal government to step in for various reasons. I just don't like it when they start stepping in because they think they know better than. That's my fine line. This is your livelihood.
Yeah, and I think to give the government credit, some of these agencies in this instance, just specifically to the telehealth space, is, they did open up the Federal Register for comments, and they got inundated with comments, 38,000 almost to be exact.
What is the Federal Register of comments?
So basically,
no.
So basically, it could be the patient or market. So when they're going to change regulations, they have to, there's a process that'll go through within the government where you can go and comment on it, and so where the lawmakers can see what you're saying, what the public says about it. So basically, typically what they have to do is there's a set period of time. It's usually 60 days, where they have to open it up for a comment period if some of these three-letter agencies are going to change the regulations, like a DEA where they have obviously oversight on the drugs and telehealth prescribing of controlled medications. They open it up for comment. There's 38,000 comments. And they said, well, hold on a second. Like the most I think that they had ever gotten was like 3,000 or 4,000, because they do it really quickly. They'll throw it up there, and where they go wrong, they don't publicize it really anywhere. It's kind of hard to find. I had actually caught wind of it, and then I sent it to Chris Bell. I don't know if he produced the movie like Bigger, Stronger, Faster. And then this is kind of a crazy story, but I had sent it to Chris Bell when they were looking at taking telehealth prescribing away. He texts Joe Rogan, and then, hey, like, I need to get on the pod. He's been on the podcast a few times on Rogan's. Sorry, I feel stupid name drop, but he's like, I'm gonna have Huberman on it. I'll bring it up with Huberman, but Huberman's not licensed to prescribe, so he kind of botched it. Instead of DA, he said FDA, but it brought a level of awareness, and then from there it like spread. So it all happened that day while I'm on the phone with Chris Bell. Had produced the movie Bigger, Stronger, Faster, and I had met him. I did his brother's podcast, so we had kind of stayed in contact after. So it was kind of funny. But I do give the government credit because they did read the comments, look through them. Hey, let's put a pause to this. Then they set up listening sessions where a lot of people in the healthcare industry should go and talk right in front of the administrator. And I don't want to say like they haven't been listening. I think they've acknowledged saying, hey, there needs to be guardrails put in place. We want to keep access to care. Let's make sure we do it right. Now, at any time could Congress roll through with new laws to kind of change it as well. Yes, it gets very complicated with how the laws come to fruition
Especially
between
state versus
oh my
federal.
gosh, yeah, it can get very 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 confusing. But I do want to give them credit because I do think they've been listening to the public or to the market as well. So like that's been good. So we'll see what happens. But I feel very positive with the way like the wind's blowing.
You say the tides of change have been shifting in your favor with regards to like the intelligence of the consumer to your product.
Yes.
Do you think that is also can the same be said about our elected officials?
I think in some cases, yes, because like specifically, I know some of the elected officials who are taking this, doing these forms of treatment. So I think that has that helps as well. So like, yeah, to answer your question, yes, I do. Because I think it still goes hand in hand because like that level of awareness, they're all still citizens, but one's an elected official. And I think that level of awareness has helped. And some of that stigma and taboo has gone away. And it'd be there's massive Facebook groups, like we're talking tens of thousands. Maybe that's not massive. I don't get on that much, but I know of some that have over 50,000 people in, these different groups talking about specific to hormones, what clinics are using, and look into the public, and they share a lot of information. But there's a lot of people talking about it a lot on Reddit and some of these onlines where that wasn't near as prevalent, like especially when we first got into it. So it really has caught a lot of traction. So I definitely feel like we're at the right place, the right time, and kind of rode that wave. And so being able to get established, like even with minimal marketing, like I think we've done a good job of getting on people's radars, and we could survive off just kind of word of mouth referrals and some of the marketing we've already done to a certain extent. So
Can I ask another question that's
Sure.
kind of like half operational? It's like industry and then also you anecdotally your own business. What is like the goal now? So like when you were discussing about how like you kind of birthed this, it started with like a few states and then you got to more states with in terms of like the regulation and then finally you got licensed in all the states, right? So in terms of licensing, that doesn't seem to be the hurdle that is inhibiting growth right now.
correct.
You have been talking about a little bit of marketing, a little bit of legislation. If I'm talking to you 4 or 5 years from now, what would be, in your estimate, the greatest variable in a trajectory for growth for you? Is it just marketing, getting this to more people? Is it maybe a horizontal scope increase of the available products, right? So instead of just HRT, maybe also the peptides, and maybe there might be products past peptides that you guys are thinking about as well. I'm trying to think of what is your, time horizon for the next 1, 3, 5 years. Like if it was ideal for you.
Yeah, no, that's a tough question. I mean, I think I look at it just like more so like internally, where like we're always trying to refine our processes, our systems. I think we've done a really good job as far as that, and like we know of I think we've already established the model of like what we need to do to like scale the business, like how many, like now we have enough data where like I don't like foresee that being like an issue for us. I think ultimately for us it's just kind of driving and I feel like we do have an established culture within the business, but it was hard because things get neglected because the business was moving so fast. Like we really rode the wave of the industry. So like yeah, I think it's as we grow, just being able to, as we grow the staff and grow the teams, keep everyone rowing in the same direction, if that makes sense.
No, it
like
does.
I think that's where it comes down to as far as hindrances of growth for like our clinic specifically. Like I think that's making sure like that's all in line. I think as we move forward and grow in the number of people from an industry standpoint, like I think all the things we've mentioned, like government regulation, availability of medications, all that things, those could potentially play a factor. But I think it's looking more promising. Like the longer we've been in it, I feel like it's getting, I feel like it's not, it hasn't gotten worse. It's gotten better. Now there's been
regress. It's only
yes,
progress.
yeah. So like I think there's going to be more and more options though, like from a medication standpoint. I think like you're going to see just newer drugs for anti-aging that are going to start coming out because I think it's becoming a bigger, more popular market. So yeah, I think it's only going to get bigger. So like I don't see like any hindrances from a a regulation or medication availability standpoint, but you never know. Things could change for sure.
Well, I'll tell you what, man, this has been extremely illuminating to me for various number of reasons. Now, I also want to say one thing. I don't think we did this conversation justice based on what we had on the phone call. But the problem is because on our phone call, we were discussing everything from peptides to testosterone to performance enhancing in
Sure.
sports.
Yeah,
and
we haven't
why.
even got to that yet.
But the problem is we're 2 hours and 3 minutes into this.
Yeah.
And now if in 2 hours and 3 minutes, and we basically just scratched the surface on testosterone and hormone replacement and these things, would you ever be available to coming back on
For sure.
with
For sure.
this? I hope this was enjoyable.
No, it's been great. No, it's been great. Definitely would love to come back on.
Yeah, dude, I want to do it again, and if we do it again, I would like to cater this more towards the drugs specifically in sports.
Yeah.
And what you think is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what sports, why, pro, con, all these
Yeah.
other things. Forgive me. I have, so for those that don't know, I have a timer on. You're the first guest where I forgot where our time was. And I don't want to start another topic and not do it justice.
Okay.
So
That's fair.
if you're okay with this,
Yeah.
I mean, before we end, is there any last thing you wanted to say about HRT or specifically peptides? Because those were the two things that we talked about
those are
the
things we
most.
talked about a lot. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really not so much about the drugs. What I encourage people to do more so is like, take control of your health, get some blood work done. I think there's a lot of, how many people do you talk to that are in their, 40s or 50s? I can't remember the last time I've been to a doctor because I think people it's sick care is ultimately what it is. They wait till they get sick to go to that. There's not really, people aren't thinking from a preventative standpoint for the most part. It's getting better, I think. But I always just recommend people like, hey, get some annual blood work done. Like, don't think about the drugs. Just, I think, get a better understanding of your health and all the data and information that's out there now that's available at your fingertips. Like, did not exist 20, 30 years ago, like with the internet, and there's just, you could run blood work through AI feature. Like, there's all sorts of stuff like you can do that is really good information for you. So that's like kind of where I would put it. I don't want to think about the drugs. Just like my advice to people is like, hey, get some blood work, get diagnostic tests going, and go from there.
While I agree with that, because I'm also susceptible to that, I'm very like, hey, I feel fine. Why do I need to go see a doctor? What would you say to the people that are like, and this might be a loaded question, so forgive me.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes easy for us to say like, oh, go see a doctor, go see this. But what do you do for someone who might not necessarily have health insurance? This is how ignorant I am. I don't even know what like a blood panel costs.
Yeah.
Like, is a blood panel, when you say go get your blood work, is this like a $300 thing? Is it like a $50 thing? Like, what are we talking about in terms of?
There's thousands of different blood tests you can run, but most of the even if you didn't want to check hormones, you just want to do lipid profiles, so like cholesterol, metabolic panel, blood count levels, like that's a really cheap test. Like, you're looking at under $100. So there's a lot of cash practices like ours. Like, we have a lab store on our website. You can go and, if you hear Huberman or Peter Attia talk about one of these panels, oh, you need to check it, you can go to our website and order it yourself, and you can get the results sent back to you. You have to go to a local lab to have it pulled, but
Quest
yeah, so
Diagnostic or
yeah,
something.
very, very accessible. Like, it's it's pricey. A lot of times people will go and try to get their blood work done, bill their insurance, and then their insurance like, I'm not covering this. It wasn't ordered by a doctor. They'll try to make it stiff with a really big bill. But there's a lot of like cash. If you don't have insurance, there's cash options, like from not just only our company, but several other ones too.
Beautiful. Because that's just like the one thing I hear from a lot of people whenever I talk to them about anything, and they're always like, yeah, well, you have health insurance. And I do have to kind of catch myself and say, yes, you're correct. Like, I'm speaking from this perspective of resources and stuff like that. But I do think that this is something that like everyone should do, at least once a year, just see where your levels are at, see where you're at. Maybe you can catch a lot of things as you were talking about, instead of waiting until you see side effects or symptoms, perhaps catching some things a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm never one to tell people what to do, but just want to raise a level of awareness. Like, I think that's a good, simple start when you use people, hey, I want to start getting healthier. Well, let's get some baselines to see where you're at. And this doesn't just go to the hormone prescribing; it's other areas and other diagnostic markers to keep an eye on yourself. And like I said, there's a lot of tons of great podcasts and information at your fingertips. So much information it can kind of make your head spin because there's conflicting information, but have to kind of decipher through, the credible folks.
Wherever you tend to hear the same information, that's the credible, and then the differing team seems. If some people are saying 80% of the same thing, then that's the truth. The other 20% is still like the hypothesis. Still stuff that's up for
I think a good thing, like nothing against like the researchers and people pull it. I think too, like making sure you're listening with a lot of clinical experience too, like in a clinical setting. Like
not
I
just
think
throw science in the gym.
I think there's a big difference there. Or even if it's they're basing their opinions only off of research, what we found is like can be vastly different from actually what people see in a clinical setting.
Jeff, this was easily the podcast in which I learned the most. I want you to know that. This will be 71 episodes now. 70?
You're getting up there.
71 episodes. This was the podcast in which I learned the most. So I want to say thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you for having me. Hopefully, we'll do it again and
100%
more the next time.
I'm looking forward to the
having
next time.
For sure. Thanks so much, buddy.